We're ready to go. Morning, everybody. We'll kick off with that karakia. Mate whakarongo, mate kōrero, mate nākau,
mate wāroa,
mate tāki mai,
mana ki atu,
ka pūwai, tanga, te
e mōre.
Through listening, through talking, from the heart, from the spirit, through giving and receiving respect, understanding will bloom. This is the essence of life. Come along to our council meeting today on the 20th of September. 3 months till Christmas. We have Councillor Spraggan, I think, currently probably losing his breakfast over the straight, so he's going to be a little bit late due to the conditions, but he's on his way. And we've got Councillor Boparai on Teams today. For health and safety, the usual. Sorry. Jumping ahead of myself. Can I have a mover for that apology, please? Seconder. All in favour? Anyone against? It's carried. Toilets are just outside the chamber on the right there. Should you need to evacuate, please exit down the stairwell. Don't use the lift. The entrance is on Bay Street car park. Earthquake, drop, cover and hold. And if we can just make sure that our phones are please turned to silent. And just a reminder that these proceedings are being recorded for the purpose of live video, both streaming and downloading. And by remaining in this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed for viewing by the public. Okay, do we have any leave of absence? There being none. Do we have any conflict of interest for the agenda items today? There being none, I don't think we have any extraordinary urgent items.
No extras today.
So that takes us to the confirmation of the council minutes from the 6th of September that open up at page 6. Do we have someone in a position to move those? Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor O'Brien. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. I don't believe we have any public participation today. So that will take us to our first report, 7.1, the community update from the Hollyford Conservation Trust. So I'll welcome Lindsay up to the table with Ken. This is on page 11 of your agenda.
Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. I'd just like to introduce Lindsay Wilson from the Hollyford Conservation Trust. So the Conservation Trust is one of the organisations that we give funding to every year, and Lindsay's here to give you an update on what they've been up to. I'm just going to hand over to Lindsay, and there's a presentation as well. So this will control.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity to come along and talk today. And at the outset, I'd like to say thank you very much for the support that the Southland District Council has provided to the Conservation Trust right from the beginning, really. So it's been hugely appreciated. So thank you all for that. So I guess the Hollyford Conservation Trust was formed in 2014 when there's a group of passionate supporters and landowners from the Lower Hollyford Valley got together and thought, let's go and do something about the degraded state of the Lower Valley. So I guess the next one, maybe. Okay, that'll be okay. It's not the order I thought, but anyway, that's okay. So that was our vision at the outset. So just kind of going back a few steps. The Hollyford Valley is a really rich, diverse kind of habitat there. It's got the biggest sand dune system in Fiordland. It's got wetlands, lagoon, the river, really diverse podocarp rata forest, beech forest, so a whole heap of different kind of habitats there. And back in the day, had huge numbers of birds and insects and lizards and so on and so forth. Really important mahina kai for Māori back in the old times, and the settlers talk about going out there and harvesting kakapo and kiwi and weka and kaka and kereru for food. There's such an abundance of wildlife there. But that same productivity of that system also meant when the bad guys turned up in the late 1800s, we had the stoats and the rats turn up. They got to enormous numbers as well. And similarly, when the possums arrived in the 1980s, they grew huge numbers, began to munch their way through the fuchsia and the rata forest. So there's I guess the area, the interesting thing about Martins Bay is that it's 12,000 hectares we're looking after of Fiordland National Park. But embedded within that are 19 private land holdings, or ratepayers, I guess, for you guys. So that's kind of an unusual situation, obviously, a leftover from the old Martins Bay settlement. But it means there's a bunch of people there who have had a longevity of connection with the area. And some of them had really seen the decline and the birds and the forest was starting to get impacted on by all these predator numbers. So they kind of approached me actually when I was in my position of conservation manager back in 2014 and said they're really worried about what's happening there, what can we do about it? We had a public meeting in Queenstown, and the upshot of that was, it was the best meeting I've ever been to, actually, public meeting. Huge support. Everyone wanted to make the place better. So as a result of that, the trust was formed. There's representatives of landowners, people from Makafior, and we work in partnership with DOC, Makafior, and Hollywood Guided Walk. We've got a commercial enterprise there. So it was a really good, positive group of people, and out of that, that's sort of the vision we had was to basically improve the ecosystem and get some of the species back that we used to have. Try again on this, right? This one, yeah. So on the left there, that's sort of an aerial shot of Lower Hollyford as it is today. So many of you, I'm sure, have been there. But that's in 2020, we had that big flood there, and that's the new outlet that you can see blasting out in the middle. It used to come down towards the bottom of the photo and then out, but that's the new outlet, which has changed actually the area quite significantly. But we manage about 12,000 hectares there. Ranges from the Kaipa River in the south up to Big Bay in the north. You can sort of see in that photo a bit of an idea of the kind of diversity of habitats that are there. So the big priority, like a lot of New Zealand conservation projects, is predator control. So the first thing we did was establish, you can see on the right-hand photo there, all that sort of orangey yellow area. That was our first area we began work, and that's about 3,000 hectares. That's the kind of low-lying, highest productivity site, I guess you'd say. We established an intensive predator control grid in there. It's like, overall, we've got about 400 kilometres of tracks, 2,000 tracks, 2,000 bait stations, etc. So really intense, sustained control. And then we were lucky to get funding in 2020 from Jobs for Nature, which enabled us to expand our project north and south to that green area. So that's just stoat control only, the rest of it's all forms of control. So that's really important because for stoats are such mobile animals, doing a little wee area, you don't really achieve as much as you'd like to because stoats are just blasting it out from all the time. So with that large area, we've managed to get stoats down to very low levels in our middle area. I guess what sort of happened since then is that we've just had some spectacular results. It's such a productive place that when you take the bad guys out, it just goes boom. And we've got a dawn chorus back there now. If anyone, we get comments all the time, people who haven't been there for say 10 years, go back there and they give all the feedback about being woke up in the morning by the dawn chorus. Our trust chairman, Ron Anderson, he had 46 kaka in the tree by his house recently. Used to see like one every few days. I just came out of there yesterday actually, and there's a flock of nearly 50 tui just working its way through the kōwhai along the lake edge, and flocks of kēturu. So the numbers of the abundance of birds has just gone through the roof really. And we do formal monitoring there with bird monitoring, sort of a prescriptive approach. And from that we've seen the middle metal grow from 1 per hectare to 6 per hectare. The korimako, the bellbirds, gone from 1 a hectare to 8 per hectare. So phenomenal increase in numbers. And the forest, similar story. I should say actually at the outset that we've also had 3 aerial tenacity operations through there, courtesy of Department of Conservation, which has really knocked the possums down. That's been our main form of possum control. And with the possums almost gone, the ratas now just it looks more like, I think it's like sort of like broccoli. It looks really lush and healthy looking before it's kind of getting a bit scruffy. So we're seeing a real recovery of the system there. So it's really satisfying. We returned kakadurai, the robins, back in there. They've been munched away by all the rats over the last 100 years. So we put them back in there about 4 years ago. They've established really well and expanding outwards. There's still a whole lot of things we'd like to get back in there. First and foremost being Kiltwicker, the kiwi. So there were two species of kiwi back in the old day, little spotted kiwi and the big brown kiwi. Sadly no longer, but that's our big vision really, is to get them back in there and hear them calling out again. That's a pretty satisfying. It doesn't like me. Oh, that's a little bit about the gadgets we got there. So a lot of gear on the ground. Yeah. So that's just a sort of a numbers thing. We've actually now killed about 1,400 stoats since we started, which is how many you kill's always less important than how many are left. And what we're really seeing now, we've got that expanded stoat control area, is the numbers are really well down. We've got camera monitoring in place and we're seeing very low stoat numbers. So pretty cool really. That's what I was talking about with the metal and the korimako growing numbers.
So sorry, that previous slide, does that show what happened when COVID was on, the numbers expanded again?
Not really. It was just more, the numbers are more to do with beach mass, flow on from beach mass. So you get a beach mass, lots of rats, lots of mice, lots of stoats. And because it was just a small area before we did the expansion, whatever's happening in the outer forest kind of flowed in. So most of the stoats we were getting were on the perimeter, but yeah, it's more a reflection of that run. So we did have a wee brief period where we didn't work, but it wasn't actually that long. Yeah, so that's just, oops, get rid of that one. Yeah, that's just the increase. But that's our big vision really, is we're working with Makawhio and with Doc to get Tōkuika back into Whakatawhi Waitai, into the Martin Bay area. And I'm sure we'll get there. Now we've got this larger expanded area. I'm really hoping to see that in the next few years. So I guess what's really unique about this area, as well as the fact we've got some really passionate, motivated landowners within the national park, that gives us a really good group of supporters. But also it's such a productive system. Like I've been involved in predator control programs all around Fiordland, and this one stands out because some of them, you take the bad guys out, you can monitor the change, but it's quite subtle. But here, it's not subtle. You go down there and it's spectacular. So it's very satisfying, great to work with. And I guess I will say that, we're heavily dependent upon a strong volunteer base. We've got 100+ volunteers who come in and help with the trapping and the track cutting and all that sort of work. And also we're dependent upon donations and grants for funding. So we're really generously supported by that. And once again, thanks to the District Council for your support. So much appreciated. I think that's pretty much me, really. Any questions?
Just a comment, Lindsay. I mean, looking at those pictures there, I think we take it for granted how lucky we are to have that kind of landscape on our backyard, and equally lucky to have people like yourself protecting it and ensuring it's there for our generations. So yeah, just a thank you on behalf of us. Are there any questions from the floor?
Oh yeah, I've got a question. Well done. It's a big job, obviously, and one of the things that you're saying here is that you're constantly reviewing best practice and predator control to work to raise the necessary funds and the ongoing work. It was interesting. I don't know if you heard or not. I think it was either last night or this morning. There was a pest control initiative whereby, I can't remember what part of the North Island it was. Someone else might be able to help me who heard it as well. But they actually got the army involved with a large helicopter.
All right. Yeah.
And they used, they basically brought in, it was, I think, the equivalent of 500 traps in one hit.
Nice.
So effectively what they could do was distribute those traps. The army's job was just take this big load and dump it. And then that was their job done. And then the rest of the people came in and distributed the traps
Right, yep.
the way that they did. And the reason why they did that is because previous to that, they would use a larger number of contractors to actually achieve the same thing.
Right, yep.
So what they found is that it was massively cost effective, and it's working really well. So I don't know, maybe it's something to bear in mind for the future.
Yeah.
If we can engage that kind of practice as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, we are very fortunate because we work closely with Policy Guide Walks, and so we can kind of utilise their back flights a lot because they're flying walkers out. We kind of can fly stuff in on the back load. So we flew in 1,000 traps that way, basically backloading in. So we're very fortunate. Yeah, but if we're to do like another big upgrade, that's a really good thought. We are looking at expanding a little bit. I didn't actually mention that as well, into the Kaipo River, which is to the south. There's still some whio or blue duck in the head of that river. There's a small population existing there still, so we're really keen to just expand a little bit to incorporate that into it. So we are going to have to do another trapping operation there. Maybe we should the army and see what they practice run.
I wouldn't have thought that they would have got involved, but apparently it's quite a common thing that they do in areas of the North Island. Granted, they've probably got the resources closer to home to be able to deal with it, but you never know.
Yeah, no, cheers.
Something to look at.
Councillor Menzies?
Thank you. Interesting presentation. Thank you, Lindsay. I was also a bit surprised to hear that the possum were introduced in the 1980s. I would have thought they'd been there long before that. When did they get there in the 1980s?
Yeah, they worked their way down, basically down the coast. So, they were still. I did a lot of survey stuff in the 1990s, and there were still large areas of field, and it didn't have possums in the 90s. There's actually still some places now. So they kind of came down from past. Worked their way down the coast, so they're one of the later places to get them. So yeah, it's quite surprising, isn't it? And with places like Dusky Sound, Reservation, those places, possums are there now, but they're just kind of filtering. They haven't by no means reached their peak levels yet. So they're quite late to get. They got to massive numbers, like there was huge numbers there prior to our control.
Is there equal work going on your boundaries with neighbouring sort of areas?
Yeah, that's a good question, thank you. Yeah, so I'm also a little bit involved. There's a Big Bay Arbour Conservation Trust to the north, so they're a relatively new trust, about 4 years ago, and they're abound our northern edge in Big Bay, and they're doing basically the similar sort of thing in the Big Bay area. So that's really cool. Yeah, we complement one another. Yeah, so
that'd be helpful because you do they just keep coming in from.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of expanding out in the Upper Hollyford. There's a lot going on up there. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Lindsay, for your presentation and your passion. I'd love to hear that the birds are coming back in abundance. I just wanted to ask about deer in there. Do you have an issue with the deer population?
No, it's a very good question and one that is starting to be talked about now, which I think is a good thing. So there's very high numbers of deer in there, like a lot of New Zealand actually. And so the understory is ravaged, is probably the word. So if you go in there with an untrained eye and you look at it, you'll see all the green stuff, you'll see ferns, different species of fern, you'll see, but there's only like a half dozen species there. The things that aren't palatable to deer. So the diversity is no longer there. There's lots of, it should be like a multi-tiered understory of all different species. And if you actually, I don't know whether you know this, but the Cledau Valley, when you drive to Milford, that's one of the few valleys in New Zealand, south of Auckland, that hasn't got deer in it. Now, if you ever go for a little walk, like up the Tutukor, or used to go up the what's that little sidewalks there, you can sort of see in there what it should look like. And so that's what it should look like everywhere in New Zealand. But it's a real question. We aren't doing any work on that yet. It's obviously a very divisive subject. Some people more deer the better, some people not. And actually it's so degraded now. The experience from other areas tells us that you'd have to get deer to, like taking out half the deer would do nothing really. You'd have to get deer to very low numbers to see that recovery, because even a small number of deer, once it's punched out, even a small number of deer will keep it like that. So from a trust perspective, what we're doing, our role we see is really about advocacy and kind of start the conversation. So we're going to build 2 exclosure plots, which are like fenced, 20 by 20 metre fenced areas. We've done this elsewhere in the country, and you can sort of see then over time what it should look like, or what it does look like without deer, and hopefully that will start that conversation. I mean, I think it's the time frames. I don't think it's urgent, but it's probably a 20 to 30-year time frame problem. Because if we don't do anything, at some point, you go in there, you'll see no rata seedlings. Everything you'll see seedlings this big. There's nothing bigger than that, like rata, kamahi, all your canopy species. There's just no regeneration going on. So as those big trees fall over, there'll be nothing to grow back other than those unpalatables, and it will change. So it's a really good question,
I'm involved with the Makarewa Headwaters Catchment Group, and we've just received funding around the
cool.
population in the base of the Hokanuis and what the destruction they're doing to the farmland plus the bush. So I was really interested to hear about the population.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's one of those things. It's only ever going to work if we take people with us. You know what I mean? So it needs the support of the community, but I think we can get that support. I've been involved in projects elsewhere up north in the car workers, even with the Wapiti Foundation work. They do some good stuff in there. I think you can take hunters with you if you talking. But yeah, so it definitely needs happening. Needs attention, not just there, but all over the place. Yeah.
When your baseline report comes through, I'll flick it through to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be really interested. Yeah. Thank God.
Thank you, and I think, you're nearing your 10-year anniversary, and I think you've got measurable results here, so you must be quite proud of what you've achieved. So.
Yeah, thank you, yeah. No, thanks so much.
So if there's no further questions, we'll move to the recommendation, and it's been a great conversation, but I think we'll just alter the word to conservation. That we acknowledge the attendance of the Hollywood Conservation Trust at our meeting. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Don. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you.
And thanks again for the contribution. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so that takes us to item 7.2, which is on page 13 of your agenda, the annual alcohol report to the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority.
I think Betty's in the hot seat, she's the expert on this one. I'll just hand over to Betty rather than taking time.
Atamaria, Your Worship and Councillors. The purpose for my report is to present the annual findings in order to meet Council's obligations under the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, and including a financial report showing the alcohol licensing income from fees under the regulations for the financial year 1 July 22 to 30th of June 23. Once Council has formally received the annual report and financial information, it will be forwarded to the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority and made publicly available on Council's website and remain there for a period of not less than 5 years. Ngā mihi, thank you. I will take the report as read and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Betty. Is there any comments you wanted to make, Councillor Duffy, in your role before?
Nothing specific, just that this aspect of what council does works away probably behind the scenes, and we do, the staff do handle a lot of applications through the course of a year, and I think they do it very well. We have virtually no problems here, and probably one or two that need to be watched a bit, but that sort of happens. So the whole process with the input of the police and the Ministry of Health is to work with.
Any further questions?
Yep, through you, Your Worship. Within the report, as Paul has just suggested, consistently there seems to be, with renewals or with a majority of the new licences, there's only maybe one or two that you've rejected. With the new licensing coming in, do you see any challenges associated with that, with our overarching principle of reduction of harm?
Good question. I don't believe there will be anything in the overarching, because with the new changes, it allows for more consultation, community consultation, and allowing discretion for that to issue licenses.
Further to that, we don't have the density problems that they have in some other areas.
Just a comment, I think Councillor Duffy has acknowledged the work of the staff that sit behind this as well. That's kind of unseen. But I just also want to note the work that Councillor Duffy does on this. And I only know that when he goes away. That's what comes across to me, but there's a lot of work that's not seen, I think, in the process.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
I can do it from the couch, which helps.
It's one of those sort of mini little work streams that just sort of beaver away in the background and keep the wheels turning. And yeah, once a year we get the recognition through this. But
just a question on page 16 of the report is there's a handful of premises that will be open till 3 p.m. Have you got a number on that?
I can't give you through your worship. Good question. I can't tell you that right off the top of my head, but I can get that information to you.
This might be showing my age, but that just seems
It's not.
I think what happens after 12 or 1.
I said 3A, I said 3B.
3 p.m.
Sometimes you're just not ready to go home at 12.
Yeah.
Saying that, I don't know of any establishments that actually do open for that long, but there can be the odd special occasion that would save them having to get a special licence for, I guess. But I don't think I've seen one that goes beyond 1 or even 12:30. Yeah.
Special rugby games overseas at funny times of the day and those sorts of things. Okay, so we've got our recommendations on page 13 that we received their report and that we authorise it to be forwarded to the ARLA authority and to be made publicly available on our website, and that we receive the financial information and authorise that to be made publicly available on our website as well. Anyone in a position to move those? Councillor Ruttenclaw, seconder. Councillor Chamberlain. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got the 7.3, the road stopping at 4 main roads, Stewart Island. Good idea. Kevin, we'll bounce you back off. We'll go to 7.4 if we have the staff here for that.
Yep, Shelley's here.
Oh, okay. Well,
just waiting for
still
council.
hand that out anyway. Yeah.
Cool. So,
Shelley or Kevin talking to number 4?
Oh, it's under her name, so I said she could present it.
cool. So we're on page 35 at the end of the Bretton Hall Reserve account.
She wanted me to hold her hand, but I said I get in trouble for things like that these days.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. This report is basically to get a couple of resolutions through the council. As previously, February 2022, a report came up to council to agree to the transfer of the Mokarita Redan Hall to the Mokarita Redan Centennial Hall Society Incorporated. Usually when we do those reports up to council, we include what happens at the end once the transfer is done, and we always have reserve funds and the tie-up between the transfer of the property and the sales and the costs that year. And usually that gets transferred over to the society and they use it to pre-plan and maintenance. The balance at June 2023 was $25,399.42. This society recognised and has done future plans for their maintenance, and they have plans for that money, and that's why it is relatively high for a hall committee. but they've got plans to spend that. And the other part is we are rating for them this year, and it's currently as a rate as an expense, and we'd like to transfer that as a grant, as that's in a separate incorporated society now rather than a council entity. So they will still write to us every year to ask for money like they do with our other non-council owned halls, and we asked a copy of their finances and to keep track that it's being used for the appropriate purposes, and we grant it out quarterly on the instalments as the rates are collected with the other halls. So it's sort of getting them in line with those other entities.
Sounds pretty straightforward. Do we have any questions?
Well, they're a very close community, very connected to their hall, and right from when rating came in, they were realistic about rating at a level that actually kept their hall up to scratch. So I'd be quite happy to move the resolution.
Excellent. Is someone in a position to second? Councillor Graney, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? It's carried. Right, we'll keep waiting for Councillor Spraggan, so we'll carry on to item 7.5, which is the book replacement at page 41.
Morning.
Mr. Chair. Floor is yours.
We take the report as read, Council. There's a couple of additions that, and comments. I've had some conversations with several councillors with questions in the last couple of days that came out of the paper. So I'd just like to clarify a couple of things that are in the report. One of them is the volume comparison between what we currently have and what the proposed new mobile service looks like. And fundamentally, even though they're quite two different looking vehicles, the volume isn't very much different. And that's because of clever design, really. At the moment, we can display about 700 items in the current book bus. We can display about 500 in the new configuration, but that comes with better storage for book bins, which also makes it a better solution for delivering mobile service into schools and other facilities, wheeled book bins. And the other thing that isn't particularly clear in the paper, which I'll clarify now, is that in the finance section, the running costs, or the costs are purely for the funding or purchase or finance of the vehicles. The running costs are currently already existing in our operating budget.
Probably the opening statement, which she skipped over the good bit. The book bus is a much loved facility that goes around our community. Feedback we've had is that it's highly valued. It's got worn out. When I had to first have a look at this, I managed to find a stuff story from 2014 with previous mayor smiling next to the new book bus that had done about, the old one before that had done 350,000 Ks. This one's done about 350,000 Ks. It's just got worn out, to be honest. But what we wanted to do was put something in that actually had more functionality, I guess, than just the book bus. So this allows us to do a few things, particularly in those remote communities, that really we can't do in any other way. So that's why our recommendation has been into that option one, which gives the ability to use it in a few ways that you just can't do at the moment. And particularly, as I say, in those Starlink and those remote communities will be a game changer, I think. Allow us to do a lot of other things. So,
yeah, particularly like the ability to pay rates and those sorts of things out to those remote communities. So we're almost bringing council to the people.
Taking council out to the people in the biggest area in New Zealand, as you know, it's hard to get to.
Was there ever any consideration for a trailer rather than doing it in a van, so you're not sort of dependent on that kind of vehicle cost and you can change over vehicles?
We didn't look at that fundamentally because the successful rollouts of these services have all been by van. It's certainly something we can investigate.
I think they're a lot more manoeuvrable as a van than as the trailer. So what we try to do is make it as easy as possible for our staff to drive a comfortable vehicle with safety features that's easy for them to manoeuvre in and out of places. So trailers, Sorry, I'm a city boy. I go back a trailer to save myself. You may all be fantastic at it, but not everybody is.
Yeah, given the distances travelled and some other roads as well, probably is more practical. Councillor Chamberlain.
This might be a question for down the road, but is there any thought of, maybe putting on a bigger bus and not having so many council buildings? It does, having a mobile office going around some of the areas as opposed to doing up some of our older buildings. Has that been discussed or thought of? Or?
Through you, Chair. Certainly something that it was considered to go into the paper originally was multi-vehicle for several functions. So you'd have a mobile book service bus, and you'd have another vehicle of some kind, maybe a van too, that complete other functions, like a fully service-based vehicle or a community outreach and technology vehicle, an EME, So it's certainly something we considered. It wasn't added to this initial paper for cost considerations.
No, you sort of need this now, but if you had a bigger vehicle that could do multiple jobs in one area.
Other councils have certainly done it, Council.
The other councils that you did some research on, did they have like the Class 2 licensed vehicles, and did that pose a bit of an issue with having driver availability?
So it was really noticeable in the research and the meetings that we had with other councils that they've chosen to go this route to maximise kind of the resilience of the area. Everyone can drive it rather than having more complex and large vehicles, purely for the difficulty of getting staff that can even do it.
Councillor Fraser.
I'm just curious, in your options, did you look at the Iveco vans at all? I just noticed Maui are starting to go Iveco and because of reliability. So
it would be an option that could be added now. It was only actually noted that the appropriate size of van may be available now. Yeah. There are challenges outside of a Mercedes van, and that their door configurations are different, which requires more engineering and cost, but they certainly look like they may be suitable now.
Just interesting, we were looking at motorhomes at the weekend, and Maui's going all that way because of reliability over the Sprinters, so definitely worth looking at.
Councillor.
Councillor O'Brien.
Through your worship. We talked about this a while ago, obviously, and it's really good to see that you're taking the approach from a sort of a multifaceted approach to a book bus, as opposed to a traditional, here is a bus full of books. So we, as you say, we've got better connectivity with, say, Starlink, or the way in which we fit out or configure the van. I think equally as important, as you've said, is the ability for different individuals to be able to drive the bus who bring certain skills or attributes which are not necessarily attributed to books and the bus. So what I'm saying is, I think we touched on it a little bit last time, we play a multidisciplinary role in terms of things like checking in with our people's health and well-being from all from a wide and varied demographic. So I'd like to think that in conjunction with this particular asset, we've got the right people doing, covering a broader range of skills and attributes that we bring to our community. So is that something that you consider?
Yes, it's certainly why the work area has been configured into it, so it can be used for other purposes. It could, even outside of an ordinary roster, be used completely for another purpose. And another activity management area of council could use it and take it and use that work area, especially with Starlink and the connectivity.
Or another example could be maybe greater engagement with our communities through a youth council, or there could be any number of different areas within our council that
it can be driven. Well, it's a van, so it can be driven by anybody.
Councillor Lindsay.
Thank you, Bishop. Just a couple of questions. I note that in your report, you said an e-vehicle is not suitable because it hasn't got the range. And I may have missed this. Are there opportunities for a hybrid solution, or what does this vehicle run on? The Sprinter is a diesel vehicle. Right. There isn't a large enough hybrid
vehicle at the moment on the market in New Zealand. It's certainly something that all other councils have been interested in looking at too, Councillor. So at the moment, we couldn't find a long wheelbase van with enough volume that was hybrid.
And unfortunately, we've got a time pressure here, I guess. So the actual running costs in terms of fuel, etc., compared with the bus that we had in the past, given it's a smaller vehicle, is likely to generate a saving anyway, not taking into account the predicted increase in diesel, which would have been a factor with the bus previously. What does that look like?
Probably not a lot different. It's fundamentally the same vehicle. The book bus we currently have, it's a Mercedes Sprinter that a box was built on the back of. And really we're just not building the box on the back of the Sprinter. So maintenance and running costs as road user charges tend to be the same.
So it's not going to provide any savings to minimise the additional cost on the rates of the purchase.
Aside from.
And what's the length of life of if it's a purchase?
7 to 8 years we've calculated.
Well, probably 10.
About 10, about 10 in practice by the look of it.
In which case there'll be further options at the end of that
I would
journey.
have thought in 10 years' time, questions about e-vehicles will be a completely different discussion. The way things are progressing is, yep.
Councillor Byers?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering, in light of that Iveco possibility, is there going to be another option?
Yeah, well, I've written that down when the recommendation to invest, yeah. Councillor Byers?
Thanks, Rob. Just looking at one of the parts of the summary saying that the network access capable for allowing the vehicle to be a communication hub in emergencies, is the network that's been described, is that being kind of co-aligned with Civil Defence Emergency Management Southland, just to make sure that network is actually what would plug into that emergency network? Or is that referring to like the Starlink? Or?
It's purely referring to the Starlink as being just a much more resilient method of connecting to the high-speed internet at emergencies, because it's not dependent on infrastructure.
But there'll be a little bit of work to do to take advantage of that in the broader civil defence framework. So that's
having
just a bit of thing
radio phones and things for emergencies. If the bus needed to be activated to be an emergency hub, it would need to have the emergency network, I guess, and be aligned with what's currently at.
We'll work with the emergency service people and make sure that they
line that. Cool.
Yeah, they've got those radios spread out around Southland in each of the hubs, so it'd be a good idea to actually put one of those into the bus as well, so that they can connect
consistent
with the repeater. Councillor Ravenclaw.
Thank you. Thanks for your report and thanks for answering my questions yesterday. Really appreciated it. The connectivity for our rural communities, Starlink is a game changer. And I think that's very forward thinking to put Starlink on the bus. The latency and speed of Starlink is critical, especially in our life in rural areas. And the well resonate with Tom about the well-being of their rural communities and the book bus and what it brings and reading thanks so much.
Councillor Greenie and then Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Quick, just very brief question. Does the book bus carry an AED? Defibrillator?
I don't know.
It could.
It's just a thought. If we're talking about sort of community support and wellbeing and resilience, and
that's
just a thought.
Excellent suggestion. AED.
It even may. I'll find out, Councillor. We certainly have them in all of our
in the libraries. So, it's just a
really good thought.
Councillor Duffy.
Yes, even though that there are less books available in the van than had in the past, there's still the ability to order books from.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it provides a better storage and mobility solution than we currently have, with wheeled plastic bins and bespoke storage areas for that. So, research and what we've been doing in the survey found that we did is that book delivery and ordering is one of the most ways we can reach it.
And is there a catalogue online or
yes.
Thank you.
So we've got the recommendations there, and just noting Councillor Fraser's comment, and just thinking about that as well. I know that Fire and Emergency have used those Icos, so you might be able to get a bit of insight from them. So do we want to modify recommendation D to do an and or Iveco, or do we want to come back to council with further, or do we extend the budget to that level? How do we want it?
Really.
Look at the cost.
Are we, is there a time constraint to get this done? Like, can we come back to council in a couple of weeks?
I could quickly come back to council. Certainly, Iveco had been mentioned. It'll be a case of costing it and finding out what the engineering challenges regarding door configuration are, but I can do that and come back to council fairly quickly. And the only issues we have is the reliability of the dear old thing that's on the road at the moment, which is not great, but I can certainly do this.
We've got another council meeting in a couple of weeks, so our wonderful committee advisors just advised to potentially lighten the table until then, if that doesn't hold you up to it.
Absolutely, we'll do that, and we'll come back with the Ballad and the Iveco as an option.
So I'll move that from the chair. Do we have a second to that? Councillor Graney. Motion, all in favour, please say aye. That's carried. Thank you. Thank you. Still waiting on Councillor Spraggan, so we'll carrying on. You did text me.
Oh, right. I'm not sure.
Item 7.6, which is on page 51 of your agenda, proposed changes to the Resource Management Act 1991.
Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. The full legal review of our Resource Management Act delegations has now been completed, and the purpose of this report is to present these to council for adoption. All of the reviewed delegations reflect council's structure and the realignment process. The roles have been added to the delegations, the new roles have been added to the delegations, and roles that will be disestablished will remain during the transition period. The review included a detailed and thorough review of all of the delegations to ensure that they are complete and that all of the RMA functions and powers are provided for and allocated to the correct staff. The delegations also now include the necessary powers and functions under the provisions of the Natural and Built Environments Act. Additionally, the Chief Executive's planning delegations to staff have been reviewed and duplications of statutory delegations have been removed. Appointment of hearing commissioners and delegations to hearing commissioners have been included within the delegations. A summary of this is included in my report. If you have any questions on the proposed delegations, I'll be happy to answer those where I can.
No, we've been chatting to the people in our planning teams who tell us that what we have here is very consistent with what other local authorities have put in place. This is not a unique, tailor-made solution. It's how everyone else does it.
I guess just acknowledging the extensive work that's gone into getting this far. It's quite a detailed piece of work. Have you got any questions from councillors? Councillor Craig?
Yeah.
There being none, we've got our recommendations on page 52 that we approve and adopt the updated delegations and the non-statutory planning delegations as contained in attachment B of the officer's report. Someone has any questions on those? Councillor Butterfield, seconded by Councillor Fraser. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against? Thank you. Okay, as Councillor Spraggan unpacks his agenda, we'll go back to item 7.3, if my memory serves me right, it does, which is on page 29, which is the road stopping. We've just held that back for you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. That's the example of the changing nature of this particular project. for council's benefit of just giving you an aerial photograph showing the area that we're actually talking about. When the report was written, this information was not available on our website. It's only just the new photography. It's only just recently become available, so that's why it wasn't included in the report initially. But as we normally do, we just provide this as additional information. So I take the report as read. As you recall, at the last consideration on this issue at Wyndham, there was an objection to the road stopping. 2 days before the documents were about to be lodged in the Environment Court, the objection was withdrawn. So that then changed the status of the process to being no objections. So even if we'd gone to court and the court had approved our process, this would have been coming to you at some stage anyway. It's just come a lot quicker now that the objection was withdrawn. So in terms of the process set out in the 10th schedule to the Local Government Act, it says that we now need to go to council to pass a resolution to publish a notice that the road is stopped. That public notice and all the other relevant documentation is then forwarded to LINZ, Land Information New Zealand. And once that's registered, then the road is stopped and we can then apply for an ordinary freehold title for the stopped road and just allow for a standard transfer transaction to happen with the adjoining owner. So it's just the process. In this particular case, recommendation E is to actually issue that notice, and recommendation F is that council may, as part of its process, require the land to be amalgamated with the adjoining title. As you can see on the photograph quite clearly, one of the reasons for the stop was to deal with that historical encroachment, so having them all on one title is just the most logical outcome, rather than have the stop road on a separate title to the adjoining title. So the recommendation F is that when it gets transferred, it's a requirement that it be amalgamated. The lawyers will just deal with that.
I've just got a couple of questions myself. So is it at the position now that no one can challenge it, so we're sort of at that final stage?
Yes, correct.
And secondly, with the costs and funding, are all of our full costs being retrieved to us, so council's not actually out of pocket at all in relation to this whole transaction?
Not at this stage. As we talked about, there has been significant legal costs in this process, but my understanding at this point is that the sale proceeds will be more than our costs.
Are there any other questions from the floor? Councillor Fraser?
Just looking at the little red box heading this way, in the building next door, are there other issues, similar things on other titles in either direction, or?
Not necessarily, Councillor. I think the point with GIS and the merging of GIS and aerial photography is
it's not always perfect.
No, there's an element of inaccuracy, and that could be to do with the rectification of the photography and or the original plotting of the cadastral boundaries. So we got to take things with a grain of salt, and they're indicative only, and normally if there was some concern as to the alignment of the two, we would probably be doing some more work, but it's within CUI here, so we're not really.
So it's not an issue we're going to have heaps of this.
Oh.
Or maybe put it in your face.
There is a significant number of historical occupations off roads around the district for various reasons. We don't allow it anymore, and we haven't for years since I've been involved here at council. But with this information, you remember we got GIS and this information now that wasn't available many years ago, and people just assume fence lines were boundaries and things like that. And as time has gone on, that's proven to be incorrect, but the buildings are there. So we acknowledge those, we recognise their existence, and we don't normally let people increase their footprint of the road. But I do know there is a significant number of buildings built on roads across the district. We deal with them as and when it becomes an issue, but we don't allow any new ones. That's not what we're for.
Councillor Wilson?
I was just clearing my throat, considering whether I want it. I'll actually make a comment here, because I mean, this attachment handed out this morning, the aerial view of it gives a lot more context to me personally. I know this is the new aerial photography that we actually spent the unbudgeted expenditure on when we last talked about the same subject, and there was a similar photo included in that report. It would have been the older aerial photography. There's always Google Earth, there's lots of aerial photography available, but if you take that bird's eye view of it away and purely read the report, there's actually no comment about this process is due to the fact that there's been a building built on the road reserve. It's purely talking about the road stopping and the adjoining landowner purchasing that land. But without that context, the only reason I know the story of it is because we've talked about it before, but that was all publicly excluded. So I'm just a bit concerned that this doesn't actually paint the picture very well, this report. I'm not really happy with how it reads, to be honest.
Your Worship, the first two reports that went up were not publicly excluded. They were open reports that clearly set out that the reason for this was the building occupation. The last report was done in confidential because of other issues. But as I say, this is the fourth report that's gone up on it. So to the public, the first two reports around the reasons and rationale for the road stopping were in open meeting, and they did set out the reasons for it. The confidential one was because of confidential reasons around the objection and other issues. So your point's noted, Councillor.
Yes. As someone new to this, the report in front of me, first time around this table, this has no context. And I'd just encourage clearer context in reports of why the road stopping, what the background of the road stopping is. Obviously, there's background towards the objection and the legal framework. But like I say, this report, if I just read that, didn't have that aerial view, I wouldn't understand the background in my position as a new councillor. So I'm just encouraging clearer background information and reporting, and certainly when it's location-based aerial photography, because that is new photography, but there's always been aerial photography available.
We can take that on board.
And I think I'm just checking with here whether we can actually add this into the minutes. So
you will append that, yeah.
So if that gets appended on, then that gives you the full context with that.
Yeah, I'll be happy.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? There being none, we'll move to the recommendations, which are on page 30, and Kevin's already addressed E and F, noting that we're comfortable basically merging them into one title and selling their land to the adjoining landowner, and also issuing the public notice declaring that the road described as Section 1 SO Plan 563009 is stopped. Is someone in a position to move those recommendations? Councillor Runniclaw, do you have a seconder? Councillor Keast. Any further discussion? There being none, I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against?
Against, just because I'm not happy with the report.
Do you want a decision vote report?
Yeah, that carried. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Jane. Okay. Bouncing back to
We are on
7.7, which is the elected member working group for the representation review and proposed engagement approach on page 85 of your agenda.
Well, Your Worship and Councillors, as you'll be aware, this report is to outline the process and timeline for the representation review. It's to give Council the opportunity to establish an elected members working group, and the report is also to outline the intended engagement approach that staff are intending to undertake to capture community views on representation. So in the report on page 89, there's a table that outlines the key steps and processes that will be undertaken as part of this project. In relation to forming a working group, staff discussed the possibility of forming a working group with councillors and community board chairs in August, and the Mayor's also been involved in conversations with elected members to assess their interest. So these conversations have identified elected members who are keen to be involved, and these names have been included in the recommendations for this report. Since the agenda was produced, it's also come to light that the Mayor would like to be part of the working group too, so it's proposed to add his name to the list of members, which Fiona has marked up there, and also to add that into the terms of reference. So staff have approached Te Ara Marama to engage whether Eds or mana whenua would like to have a representative on the working group. Staff are yet to hear back, so the terms of reference have been drafted with that flexibility to just allow that membership if there's an interest. You'll be aware the draft terms of reference are attached to the report, and it's proposed that the working group doesn't hold delegations and that it will just report back to council. So staff are intending to engage with the public, community boards and key stakeholders over November this year. Continuing to prepare a comprehensive survey that will be thoroughly promoted and very easy to access. And the survey is to help staff identify representation options that will then be discussed with council in the new year. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and the recs for this matter are on page 86 of the agenda.
Thanks, Robin. I guess I'll just add a bit of context in there as well. I think whilst this is almost like a cyclic legal requirement, it's actually, I think, provides a good opportunity for us to have a good look at almost a health check of how things are going. We've got it's a very surprisingly new structure to be reviewing again. It feels like 2018 has just been, and we're just sort of getting it set up. But I think there's actually a really good opportunity here to have a look at what we have got. We've got the community board sort of embedding themselves in, and if you look at the makeup of what I've got there, there's a mixture of experienced people who've been around in various roles, but also brand new people have come in, and getting that balance in the two, in this kind of sort of, I refer to it as a think tank, because I think that's probably what it's going to end up being, to have a really good look and put a big lens over how we can best represent our ratepayers in the district. So there's a bit of method in my madness in that group, and I think it's quite a good makeup to get us a broad approach to moving forwards. Has anyone got any questions?
Just to follow on what you're saying, Rob, with that broad approach, I'd like to, I guess, propose a suggestion that representatives from Great South play a part. I had a chat with Shami and Bobby last night at the Fiordland Destination Strategy release, and there was interest, I think, from the concept of having a regional and data-driven approach with having someone in the room in a working group environment to be able to bring data and analysis of that data with that regional approach into how that could inform, potential representation ideas would be very valuable. So I'd like to just float that idea. They have suggested they would have capacity if invited to the group.
And I guess just adding further to that as well is noting the current, and I'm going to talk about it a bit later, but the Future for Local Government broader national kind of review that's happening at the moment, albeit not being driven by central government or any legislation thing, but there's a big drive from the local government sector, and the adjectives keep changing. So initially it was the future of, and then it was the future for local government, and now they're calling it the future by local government. But that's actually quite indicative of the approach that's being taken, and this to me sort of brings through that Southland approach of how we think it's going to best work, and this, I think, piece of work will feed into that. And I think having the likes of some external stakeholders like Great South and Te Ara Marama at the table will add a lot of value as well. Councillor Menzies?
Thank you, Worship. I don't think all community boards are represented on there either directly or through a councillor. So it's just a responsibility on those involved to connect in with those communities to get their view.
Yeah, it certainly isn't an isolated approach. It's going to be a far-reaching, and I think we're going to cover all the boards anyway through the process, and councils as well.
So through you, Your Worship, we also have been getting in touch with the data team at Great South just to try and use their resources as well to capture information on communities, and they've got some ideas. So we've been working with Steve and his data team as well already, but I'm happy to take on board that suggestion.
Thank you. Just thank you for your report. Just as a suggestion, us as councillors going forward with what's this representation review, will there be any survey for us of the hours that we spend in our roles in our communities as part of the review?
Through Your Worship, I understand that the Remuneration Authority does do a survey, and but I mean, if you're interested in the amount of time you spend on this project, is that what you're meaning
No,
particularly?
the time that we spend in our roles as councillors for Southland District is
It's a separate process. You remember last training, and they actually got a bit toey because they didn't get a good enough response from everyone. I think it's important that we do actually feed into that when it comes around again. And I was having this discussion with some other councils in Wellington about the disparity between what different councils up and down the country are paid, and there's huge differences. So I think that's not part of this, but it is a separate process that will come round, and we all need to feed into that really well. Councillor O'Brien?
Through you, Your Worship. Probably just want to dovetail and reiterate into what Councillor Wilson was saying, and can sort of vouch for, based on the meeting last night with Great South, that they had a real desire to be involved in this kind of framework. And I think someone else or another organisation that could be worth engaging, so that we don't create that, dare I say it, siloed approach, is the Ngāi Tahu Generation organisation as well, because I think there's crossovers there between District Council, the Regional Council, Great South as well, and I hate for us to miss a trick in that respect. Thank you.
I think just answering that, Councillor O'Brien, we've just got to be a little bit careful that we're covering all four, because that's sort of one of the runakas, so we're covering because we spread such a big patch. We just need to be careful that we manage. We don't get a full coverage of all four.
Could we make a note of that so that we don't exclude any one particular runaka? Would that be?
Councillor Baker, just around having multiple members from some community boards.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity, or maybe I have missed something here, because we seem to have more than one member from some community boards, which obviously, does away with others.
Yeah, that was more.
So could we...
I think I wasn't trying to get a cover of all the community boards, as opposed to getting, like, if you look at, take Waihopai Toitoi, for example, where you've got Han York, who's been around for
years.
Yeah, a long time, part of the furniture, and then Emily Butters, who's come in new, and having them both at the table at the same time and in the same room together, it provides the different perspectives. So it's more of a who they are rather than who they are. I'm not saying that any community board member or chair isn't important for the group, and I think getting that far-reaching approach through the process, but just having those people sort of driving that process. And the mixture isn't specifically, I'm pretty much covered the four corners of Southland in there as much as possible, but I think just getting the different types of people in the room rather than doing it fully location-based. Does that make sense?
It does to some extent. I must apologize, my camera does not seem to be working anymore. But we would have new members coming in at other community boards as well, wouldn't we? The ones who could step into this. And I have no particular issue myself, but it just seems that we seem to be having two community boards out there in number.
So we've got Atlasa, Wallace, Takatimu, Oridi, and Waihopai. So we've got four of the community boards there, but again, just sort of saying it's more on the, and not that any of the other community boards are going to be excluded from this process as it goes around. It'll go around part of, so any community board member or community board will still be able to feed in. That's just who, and that's where you draw the line of how many people you have around the think tank group as well. I've got a few sort of options in my head around it, and we've already got quite a few in there as well, getting the right numbers, but
Sure. No, you seem to have given it some thought now, but I think maybe for the future we could make a note that, we make sure as many community boards we can represent get on that review panel. Thank you.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Julie?
Not really. Probably the balance of new members and versus those that were previously on or participated in the last actual representation review. They were on the review committee. So there's a mix, a good mix in there, and I think that's what we're aiming for.
I think even noting some of the experience around last time when we had what's the word? It's not an issue, but around the Wallistown kind of, is that going to be a community board? Isn't going to be a community board, and that was quite came down to the wire almost. So having some of that experience from that, and Councillor Fraser as well, he's sort of been through that last time and can help feed into that this time, because we don't want to be reinventing the wheel too much as well. So bringing through some of that experience will be quite useful as well. If there's no further suggestions, and I'm getting a suggestion here. Just bear with me for 2 seconds. Yeah, I like that suggestion. So we've got recommendations A through to G on there with F, adding XII.
12 and 13.
12 and 13.
So he's going to be a member.
Are you ready for that?
Yep.
I'll look at that.
Yep.
And then adding a new H.
Gives authority to co-opt additional members to the working group as required.
And that provides that flexibility. To add new members that can be from anywhere, doesn't have to be from within our group. So if you have a session and come up with something, we can just add people on. Right. So we've got all of those up in front of you, except for the new one, which, sorry, Kate.
Further, because the mainways staff are proposing to capture community views, I'm thinking we should use our networks that we've got there, to get the word out that we want to hear from people. So that would be like the Thriving Southland and Rural Women Farmers, like through their networks, actually advertising what we're trying to do. Interested in talking about it and maybe get people along to talk about it through their meetings rather than getting them to come to us.
Good suggestion.
As a new H, that'll also feed into E, so amended to include what we've got as a member and the authority given in new H. Because I haven't put it up there.
New
It's
H.
here.
Gives the authority to co-opt additional members to the working group as required.
Yeah.
So someone in a position to move A through to H? Councillor Graney? Sorry, did you have a...
Well, I guess I actually want to, I'm quite happy with H to allow more flexibility, but I'd like, with what I was suggesting before, I'd like to float it to the council and move that also in F, specifically a representative from Great South.
Yeah,
they would like to.
Oh, sorry,
They just haven't made it up there yet. They're in my notebook, but it hasn't made it to the big
Well,
screen
is that fitting under the ambiguous H or a specific?
Well, I think given that you've had a discussion with them last night and they're keen, and if we're all happy for that, we can actually add that on now as
But the H isn't up there.
I wasn't sure if they'd have made it.
Sorry, I was looking at the
Your Worship, should we make, is it 12 singular representative rather than representatives, or it's getting to be quite a large group?
Or representation.
Representation or a representative.
And with the same brackets of if they would like to have a member on the group, same as they've indicated they may have capacity and interest, but I can't speak for them obviously.
Yeah. So are you happy to second that, Councillor Wilson?
So who's moved this substantive?
Sorry,
Councillor Graney.
sorry, Councillor Graney, sorry. My hearing's obviously really bad. Seconded by Councillor Wilson. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? Cool, that's carried. Thank you, that was good discussion. Okay, so. You're not having 7.8?
No, 7.9's coming first.
Oh, yes, two, sorry. Yeah.
I stuffed up the order of things on Friday.
So we've just reordered the agenda a little bit just for logistics, and so jump now to 7.9, the budget carry forward requests from the 22-23 financial year into the next 23-24 financial year. And
Thank you, Your Worship. On page 111. This is a report to inform Council of the projects and operational expenditure that we had got approval to deliver in 22-23, but we hadn't got completed at the end of the financial year. And so we're seeking approval from Council to carry forward these projects and budgets into either the 23-24 year or in some instances into the long-term plan process. So on the 6th of September, staff presented this report through to the Finance and Assurance Committee, where there was some reasonably robust conversation around what this means as a capital program in the 23-24 financial year. As a result of that conversation, there is now a report in today's agenda at 7.8 that's going to be presented by Ms McCulloch around the proposed annual plan capital program and what staff are intending to do in order to try and manage the size of that program in the current year. Since the meeting with Finance and Assurance, staff have also adjusted a few items in the report so that it is more clear to our community boards about the footpath program that was being carried forward. So Appendix 1, Attachment A, which is on page 7.9, oh sorry, not page 7.9, on page 122, is the items that are under Resolution D as the items that we're looking to carry forward into 23-24. Attachment B should be right at the tail end on page 131 are the items that have been identified that weren't completed in 22-23 and will not be completed in 23-24, so staff are looking to move those out to the long-term plan. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have in relation to this report.
thank you, Susan. It's quite a long list of projects. Councillor Menzies.
We may not be able to answer this today, but I'd be interested to know if projects carried forward earlier than 22-23 have been completed. Because we've had carry forwards for a number of years.
So I can't tell you the exact dollar value, but there are some items that were carried forward from 21-22 that are now being carried forward into 23. In a number of instances, they will have been budgeted for as a multi-year project in the first instance, but there may be some that weren't intended in that space, but I'd have to go back and check.
And I wasn't interested so much in the funding, but in the projects and carried forward.
That's why I talk about the multi-year projects. So some of the water and waste projects in particular are always intended to be done over multiple years around the consenting processes and then the builds. So all they're doing is they didn't quite get the dollar split right, but there probably are very likely to be other projects that have done complete movement, but
yes,
we'll
not
identify those in
the multi-year ones, but
yeah,
others, just to ensure that we are getting there as opposed to them being at the bottom of the basket. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I will find out what those are and then have them circulated for your information.
I guess it's just kind of repeating the sentiment from the F&A discussion, which I don't want to repeat too much on what we've already talked about, but I mean, this highlights a real challenge and the sort of bow wave is continually moving and we're trying to get a new year's work done and you've got a massive carry forward from the previous year, and it's how we kind of address that to catch up or get ahead of ourselves so that we're not repeatedly doing this. It's a challenge. Councillor O'Brien?
Yeah, it may, once again, it may be a question that you may or may not be able to answer. It could be a bit sort of crystal ball gazing maybe, but some of these projects, carry forward projects, a lot of them require resource consent applications, and some of them have had historic resource consent applications and then they've had delays and then they've had to go through the process all over again, which has incurred a hell of a lot of cost and effort. And it's been kind of annoying, I guess. Is there a way that we can sort of try and mitigate against those things happening?
Through you, definitely something that we can look at and something we are looking at in terms of process improvement into that space. So understand the issue that you're talking about, and we'll continue to look at the way that we can make sure that we've got the phasing correctly as well, or as best as possible. There will always be a few other carry forwards and pushbacks, but from the consenting perspective, it's sometimes also an unknown. If it ends up unnotified where we didn't expect it to be, then that's just something we have to be agile with and work through as well.
So with regards to, say, the new legislation coming through with the Spatial and Build Act coming through, and things which are, as an example, non-notifiable, would that be a space that you could safely say, well, you know, we won't replicate the sort of stuff happening again, as opposed to stuff that needs to be notified?
Obviously, we're looking for the most efficient path through that. If by design it doesn't add additional costs and we go through a non-notified process, obviously we'll design it and encourage whoever is it might be a community board or whatever that wants it done in a particular way, and it might be that you can go through a different process. So from the building consent perspective, for example, if the building's under 30 square metres, so it might be a small change to the design from 35 to 30, and you don't need to go through the building consent process because under the exemption it gets through that process. So we're definitely looking at those things and trying to advise on those as they come about. We won't catch everything, obviously. So
I appreciate using that example that you've just illustrated that is in the report with regards to, say, a building that, because of its size or because of its design aspect is relatively straightforward, in inverted commas, as opposed to, say, a shelter that requires, extra geotech stuff or engineering stuff. So I do appreciate that in the report.
What about Councillor Byers and then Councillor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question perhaps for Cherie or someone. Around that process, these projects, have they been rated for already? Have the ratepayers paid for them?
So it depends on how they were being funded. So if we have rated for them directly, most of these projects won't be some of the smaller ones in the communities, we may have raised $2,000 explicitly for that project. If we have done that, then the money has gone into a reserve. It is ring-fenced to be used when it comes out, when we actually complete the project. If we have got loans in relation to these, but we don't actually draw down the loan and therefore charge until we've got the work completed. So it does depend a little bit on what the funding stream looks like. A number of the community related projects are often actually being funded from the reserves in the first instances as well.
Okay.
So I guess a classic, if you want the absolute classic case will be in terms of what you're asking. In the roading program, we do the portion of the program that we are not getting Waka Katoa funding for. We are rating for in the year, so there will be some bridges are a classic that we had rated for money in 22-23 in relation to bridges. Actually, that money has now gone directly into a reserve. When they complete the work as part of 23-24, we'll get the money from Waka Katoa for their share. We will pull the money out of reserves to meet the SDC share. So they will be rated for once in that process.
I wonder if perhaps as part of this process it would be fairer to rate for projects that are rate funded when the projects are going to go ahead rather than 2 or 3 years before.
So in the instances like the roading one, particularly if I talk about that, the catch of us doing that would mean that we would probably have to loan up front because we can only set rates at a certain point in the year. So you'd be effectively trying to rate for your roading program a year in arrears. But you'd have to fund that in some other mechanism in terms of the cash flow of paying the contractors. So we'd almost end up in the space of you'd have to fund one whole year off a loan, and then you'd rate for it the following year. So the ratepayer would end up paying more money for that program.
That wouldn't apply to all projects, would it? Like more of the community level projects, the new roofs and the playgrounds and
But a lot of those will be loan funded as well, councillor, so look, they'll only, what you're talking about will happen by default, so when the project comes up. So it'll only be the ones that you actually directly rating for, which I don't think there's probably too many.
No, they have historically been very small value, $1,000, $2,000 historically. There might have been as small values projects that would have been in that space, but very.
I suppose just an idea of how much of the grant funding portion of these carry forwards would have been.
I guess the catch being ultimately shy of them being Waka Katoa funding or some other grant, they're all ultimately rate funded in some shape or form. The question is whether it's at the time of doing the work or whether it's in loan repayments down the track, which of course interest in on top of that as well.
I guess one of the other risks, just looking at like the ceiling in Waikaia for Cleveland Street, like that one there, that if the costs go up significantly, which with roading you do, then if you're funding it out of a ratepayer reserve, it might not have enough to fund and then you get into that unbudgeted expenditure kind of case, and yeah, so it's challenging. Councillor Chamberlain, and then
Through you, Rob. Just at the Tuatapere Community Board meeting yesterday, we had concerns that the money that had been allocated to Tuatapere through the Better Off funding has been pushed out. And one question is, there's a certain time frame that's got to be used?
Is that for the railway station? Yes.
So my understanding is the Better Off funding does have a date on the end, but I couldn't tell you what that is at the present. It will depend on what the contract's been.
Yeah, because that was a concern that, well, the more it gets pushed out, the less bang for the buck that they get for their 310,000 that they're getting, and the fact that if it expires and they end up, I mean, is there you rank all those jobs, so all the Better Off funding ones, would they?
So the Better Off funding has been tracked through a separate process, both through the capital group and in other places to make sure that we're actually using that money. Not a dissimilar process to what was used for the stimulus funding and even some of the TIF contracts. Part of that is a combination of understanding, and I haven't seen or personally read the Better Off funding contracts, but actually understanding what's in those contracts and whether, like some of the tourist infrastructure funding items, we could actually go back and get extensions on. I'm not sure whether Better Off funding has that same mechanism built into it, but they are certainly looked at in context of there would be no intention by staff to go, if Better Off funding is required to be completed by X date, or we're not looking to start it until too close to that to be able to deliver.
Yeah, because it's a very valid point, because we don't want to find ourselves in that position where we go to do the project and the funding's no longer there because we've gone over. So I think taking that whole of project view as to how it's actually being funded and the criteria around that.
And now the point is, the longer we leave it, the less bang for the buck they get. So there was real concern around that we were told this project's getting pushed out till next year and beyond.
So the board wanting to do it sooner?
Yes, well, at least get the process, start getting the ball rolling.
I think that question was asked at the Reti Community Board, and it was 25. If we just get confirmation coming back even after lunch, so that might ease the anxiety for as well. But my other question was just tracking through the progress of these carry forwards. Does that come back to us at forecasting time, or when do we hear back?
So I guess once we put them through carry forwards, some of them are operational, so they'll just flow into our standard reporting processes. So the reporting that comes through project delivery team, talking about where they're at and what's going on with that, and the community boards will be getting these. Anything that relates to the individual community board will suddenly start appearing in their operational reports. We will still be talking about it in forecasting and coming through in the financial report and significant variations against items as well.
Yes, that's probably the main report, isn't it? Coming back to the council to look at the whole picture, which I think is probably quite important in view of the discussion that's coming later as well. Thank you.
Councillor Rice and Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to ask this question at the next one, but there's a lot of projects that the community have paid for, but they're not going to be done for a couple of years, and a lot of these projects could be done, I would have thought, at a community board level, like painting the wall, or they can get quotes for re-roofing or whatever. Is there not the potential for some of these projects to be removed from council and passed to the community board?
And that is in the next report. With
I'll save that, okay.
If we save that question for the next one, but yeah, no, valid question. Councillor David?
Yes, so I'm just querying the Edendale Wyndham multi-use track. So on that graph on page 131, where it says that $350,000 was forecast out to 23-24 for initial design and initial construction. The remainder to be deferred to the LTP, and then there's a carry forward of 87,000. So, sorry, what does that really mean?
So what it means is, and I'd have to get the exact details of the total because I'm not close to it, but it means that we must have, as part of 22-23, had a total budget, and I'm now literally inventing numbers, of $200,000. $200,000 that we hadn't spent. Someone's gone, actually, based on the work program and how we're expecting to deliver it, we're expecting that we'll be able to deliver, say, $150,000 in 23-24, and we're saying $50,000 of that will move out to the long-term plan. So they've looked at the project as a total and considered what are they likely to be able to deliver in 23-24, and then what's going to be moving outwards. So that's why it'll appear in two places. There will be a part that they are saying they will be able to, they expect to complete this year, and there will be part of it that they know is going to be moving into that long-term plan.
Okay, so in effect, there's some money available for this year. It's not pushed right out completely.
That would be.
And then the rest for the LTP from then on.
So that's going to be no.
Which is kind of similar to Derek's point around you don't want to be sort of slowing down the progress of these projects if it's the appetite and the ability to carry them on through the board level.
Yeah, well, I know there's a person that talks to me who's a bit unhappy about community board projects sort of getting pushed out while council projects are pursued. And it's important, I think, we keep faith with our community boards with some of these things which are very important to them and their communities and have been around a long time.
Yeah, well, that's a good example of a project that, and the railway one, the railway station.
Exactly, yeah.
Getting worked on for years, and we don't want to stop losing your tracks. Did you have an answer for that, Susan, or were you comfortable?
I would need to go back and double check all the documentation as to whether there is something in both years or whether they are looking to move the entire project into the long-term plan. I just can't see.
I think Pam sort of believes that perhaps it's all pushed right to that, which would be, I don't think, a very good outcome.
We've got Councillor Keese and then Councillor
Minton. Excuse me. When does operational budget get carried forward?
Generally where there's already contracts in place for delivery of an item, and where it's not meeting so it's not tracked in the same way as the project. So often there will be potentially consultants engaged, there's already a contract there, they haven't delivered the work, but we've already got a signed contract in place is one of the quite common instances that it occurs in. Some of the others are, like you see in there, things like the Luxmore subdivision development sale. So we thought it would all go through in the last financial year. It's going to be coming through in this financial year. So that again, it's a process or a contract already in place and moving through a process that we need to have some budget in this year for. In some instances, they are like the observation rock platform as a grant that we provided. We do it on behalf of someone else so that we need to organise that through, just as I'm looking through that.
89,000.
Thank you, Worship. Just in relation to the earlier discussion and the community boards feeling a bit aggrieved at times with some of the feedback, and what is the possibility around staging some of those projects rather than shifting the whole project forward, that there's components of it that can start, so they in effect become a multi-year project rather than one single year. So it's, I don't expect your answer now, but I just need to know generally, can that be considered?
Fran can answer that one.
Through you, absolutely, that's the appropriate, looking at the phasing and having the ability to do that, and also in the
consideration. So the next paper will address it as well. But essentially that's a logical thing for us to do. Sometimes what we've been doing in the past has been lumping it all into one year because we've not known exactly how much, and then we've carried it forward. So if we can phase but also have the opportunity to do what we're calling a pull forward rather than a budget expenditure, it's called a pull forward, we've accelerated the project a bit faster than we anticipated, then the idea is that if the money was set aside in the next long-term plan, that we could pull that forward if it's a capital project, for example.
Yeah, the two reports kind of do go very hand in hand.
Sorry about that.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Rob. I've noticed in the work streams there's 13 roading projects that is new streetlights for different communities, and they all do have the same carry forward explanation, being delayed, increased lead time for the suppliers, I imagine the streetlights themselves, and then to decrease the cost of installation, essentially getting the new streetlight maintenance contract to get installation. I guess in that process of what Dom was saying of allowing communities to take some of these projects on, ironically in one of these towns the community wanted a new streetlight and power pole somewhere, and being funded just locally and privately has been done, showing that there's not exactly a huge constraint on the resource to get installation. My question would be, it's the same carry forward explanation for 13 different new streetlight projects. I understand Riversdale's currently got their streetlights, arrived in the country, and I think they've been waiting over 20 months for installation. So are all of these 13 work streams just awaiting installation, or are some still awaiting streetlights to arrive? Can installation begin? And is the carryover project budget, is that the capital expense of the streetlight plus the installation establishment costs? And I just see that there's 13 of the same project, but I don't understand if they're all at the same phase currently. I'm not overly comfortable carrying over a lump 13 projects that are essentially the same thing, but maybe in different stages of the process.
So they are in exactly the same stage in the process. The lights have been purchased and they are all waiting for installation. Understanding of them at this point.
Is that one supplier to allocate the commitment?
I suppose just a bit more detail on that. Yes, it's the same supplier. There's a tender out to market, tender evaluation takes place. We're booking for the 4th of next month. So that's how far through the process we are, and that includes the installation aspect of those lights are in that tender document. So the evaluation is on the 4th of next month.
So that's one contractor do all 13 project installations. How will they be prioritised as far as timeline?
We've asked for the Riversdale ones first. And then that contract is a long-term contract, so future years we won't have the same issue. That for future projects, the capital work is included in that contract. So it's a long-term contract that includes capital work for future years.
So these carry forward budgets are still kind of on par with what they would be?
I think it should be alphabetical and start in Edendale.
And I think, reflecting on even the conversation today and events, I don't think anyone in the room is actually comfortable with the situation we're in, staff and elected members alike. And what does make me comfortable is that the situation that we're in is actually being worked on and addressed, and we are looking at better ways of doing this across both sides. So I think that's, I think no one thinks that we're in a great space with this, and it'll be good to see some changes put in place to address this, and hopefully we're not sitting here in 2 years' time in the same position with a list multiple pages long of carry forwards. I've just tried to scroll up my paper with my hand, so I think it might be time for a break soon. But are we in a position to move the recommendations? Have we had enough discussion on this?
Sorry, through your worship, probably more of a statement rather than a question, but some of the things that you've been talking about today, and probably Councillor Chamberlain's concerns from his community board and other people have been talking about concerns around, regardless of where the funding's coming from, we're in this position now where we're having to carry forward, and I know that's an ongoing thing, and it probably always will be, but the concern that Derek was talking about saying, well, what surety do we have in order to be able to actually complete these projects And I don't know if, hand on heart, any of us can really, give an assurance around that. So I think at a community board level, we've got to be really careful about some of the signalling associated with, where the funding's coming from and why it's coming, and how long that funding may or may not continue. Because ultimately, none of us really have the ability or the control, regardless of whether we're at a community board level, a council level, a local government level, to be able to, really make those promises.
Part of the situation we're in is actually a result of the better funding that came in from the side. We had our plan in place, and then all of a sudden we got this funding available to us that couldn't fund things that were already in our plan. So, that's stupidity from a planning point of view, but also we're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. So it's created a whole lot of the situation that we're in. So it's a one-off, but yeah, noting your comments as well, and a lot of that will come through in the next report as well, I think.
Thank you.
So are we in a position to recommendations A through to D, and I won't.
No, there's an E as
and
well.
an E as well, somewhere at the end of all of our pages. So approving the expenditure relating to the 22-23 projects identified in attachment B, which is very long, included into the 24 to 34 long-term plan. So that's E, and then D was, I assume, which I will not go through one by one. Is someone in a position to move those? Councillor Menzies, seconded by Councillor Graney. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye. Anyone against? That's carried, and we'll have a quick break for it's a 10-minute break. Come back at 10:02.
Paper to look at the annual plan for 23-24, given the quantum of carry forwards, and then consider whether that was a deliverable program, and in doing so, identify projects that either could be phased into later years, or maybe moved into later years as well, to be more realistic about what is capable of being delivered within the team. We talked about at that time a delivery program being given past years and the resourcing that we've had within the organisation, a figure of 36 million as being the top end of the achievable, because you will see it's I think around 28 million is probably approximately the average. So that 36 though was an uninflated and cost escalation component not included within. So the amount that we've the projects that we've come up with are heading in the right direction for a deliverable program. There's still, you'll see in the paper, the commentary around $1 to $2 million more of community related projects that perhaps would be, if we're going to try and make this a deliverable program, are likely to need some more conversations, but we're doing that in workshops with our community boards. The first 2 community board meetings have resulted in no further dollars and no further projects being identified at this stage. So we've gone back and also done a further look at the program, and we've come up with a further 6. So you'll have a new addition to the table of projects. You'll have and I think that's an email to the hub as well, so you can see those, but for those that aren't in the room. So that's a further 1,055,000 that has been identified. So that's the bottom table. So you've got three tables on Appendix 1 now, the new Appendix 1, and there is a further 1 million of projects being suggested by the team. You'll also note that that has a knock-on effect to the dollars in the tables that we've provided. So you'll see there's another document table that's been provided to give you the updated numbers. The highlighted yellow numbers are the ones that are changing. So essentially it's the community resources area where those projects have been found, other than the transport roading, transport other, which includes our wharves, and airport. So in there's a further component that has changed, that you've seen.
Is it possible to interrupt? Just,
Yes, go on.
just in the project name descriptions, and this has come back some stage in the past anyway, around people's interpretations when they're reading through our plans. Like we've got in there the development of the master plan for the Golden Bay, which I assume is Wharf, or just for Golden Bay. So that looks to me like we're spending $450,000 on developing a master plan when that probably actually covers the work as well. So I think for Joe Public that's reading through this, it would get those project names quite relevant. It will help in identifying some of that.
Yes, and I'll also, the Riverton New Beams, and people might go, what is the Riverton New Beams? That's a new one, that's on the, of the 6. So that's in the cemeteries and the placement of the headstone for the headstones to go on. So I agree, we'll work on that and hope to get that better for you in the future as well.
Sorry, I'll let you carry on.
So just in regards to the numbers, now you've got a new set of numbers, getting closer, so maybe we're looking for a further million if it's possible, rather than 1 to 2 million, to make the program more achievable. I'd just like to, I'm sure you've read the report, so I'm not going to go into all the detail, and here you've got lots of questions, so I'll take them through the questions. However, I wouldn't mind just bringing your attention to paragraph 16, which talks about the office building that is still in there, so if you took that off the total number for, which is the community resources total, that does come down to 11, from 11 down to the 6 of the ones that the project delivery team will be working on. And further to that, I'd just like to also take you through to paragraph 25, where we talk about the roading program, 26 actually. We'll take you through to the roading program. That's a way larger program in dollar value than has been delivered before. There's a couple of good reasons in there. It's not necessarily related to the quantum of work that's being done in there, and Hartley can correct me anytime he wants to. So part of this is the pavement rehabilitation is a similar volume, but when we're doing the resurface renewals, we're likely to be delivering 70%. So the dollar value might still be the same, but the amount of work that we're delivering there is different. Got that right. Also, if you go down to paragraph 29, you'll see that there's a whole lot of work that's under construction that we've already procured, or the design is underway. So what you can see there is we've got a 3-year Wakakatahi program that we need to deliver our program through. A lot of the designing and other things and tender preparation and so on have been occurring through our procurement. The build phases this year is going to be a heavy building, getting those things completed, those projects completed. Hartley feels comfortable he's going to get that done this year. So even though that looks like a higher number, we believe that we've got that planning in place to get us to the right space. Huge carry forwards. We'll see what he is for that 3-year program. Happy to look, absolutely still looking at innovation in terms of some of the other questions that were starting to circulate. The phasing is going to be critical. We are still looking at how we phase that. How to deal with the bow wave of work that we then just push into the next year. So essentially at the moment, the long-term planning figures for 24-25 are starting to look, a little ugly as well. So we're not going to leave it there. We're going to actually look at how we smooth that out or deal with that blip. We haven't got a solution for that at the moment, but you can guarantee we're definitely looking at that for the long-term plan as well.
I think part of the innovation that you talk about, and that's probably quite a key word in this whole thing, comes back to what Matt, Don and Tom kind of referred to that last report with. And I know there'll be some contracts that are already let out that there's no room to kind of move, but where, for example, the street light and Waikawa, where there's the ability for a local contractor to come in and potentially deliver something that goes outside of what was originally planned, but there's an opportunity there to, and using that, sorry Julie, matrix that's on identifying the smaller, easier to do projects and can suddenly sort of come in, especially if there's ones being, so I think, yeah, the innovation is probably a key word in the space, but not in the terms of having to fly to the moon or anything. Some of the innovative stuff might be quite simple.
Yes, and so we're definitely, part of that process will be also identifying, we're going through a process at the moment to try and look at how we might categorise the projects into, these have got quite a lot of engagement requirement, or these might be ones that could be delivered by the community, there's big health and safety issues, or these are big contracts that, you know, this is like a $60 million wastewater treatment plant, you know, we can categorise them and look at the process and the gateways and actually how to manage those in a way that, you know, realistically gives us the quantum for each of those years. So that categorisation, you know, we definitely want to look at whether the community can deliver on some of those projects rather than the internal team. Yeah, so definitely a work in progress, not there yet, but definitely something we're looking at. So good points that have been noted around the table already.
I guess just reflecting as well, I struggle a little bit with using that dollar amount as the measure. Like just looking at two things here, we got the runway service rehabilitation, that's $1.2 million, and then you've got the Riverton Library redesign of the internal layout for $63,000. Whereas the runway is quite a simple project in terms of actually delivery, but the Riverton Library redesign might actually have a lot more complexity. So yeah, I think we've got to be careful not to just measure on the dollar value, but actually look at the project as well.
And that's a very interesting point, because the smaller projects where the community engagement, you know, there's a lot more of those processes, the scoping of the document, making sure, you know, it might be projects that mana whenua are really interested in. So there's a lot more toing and froing. The dollar value might only be, you know, $20,000 or $50,000, but it's actually quite an important project for the community, and so you're absolutely right. And so what you will see is the community resources line is actually one of the ones that is, in terms of energy for the project delivery teams, you know, they spend a lot more energy on there than, you know, one big bridge of I don't know, $1 million or something. There's a lot of design work that goes, you know, structural engineer out of house and blah blah blah, but it's those ones that are internal, smaller ones, lots of communication, lots of connection, that dollar-wise don't look significant, but actually in terms of time-wise, take a journey to deliver.
I think just before I go to the floor, I don't want to hog the microphone, but reflecting on previous comments as well, the importance of taking the community board on the journey at this point, so that they're not getting surprised down the track where all of a sudden something that they thought was going to be on track suddenly got Councillor Menzies patiently waiting.
No, thank you, Your Worship. It was just that you had mentioned the comment, sort of the last discussion, about the better off funding and the completion dates around that, which in effect with the better off funding, which came in last year, has actually meant that the projects that were in place prior to that have now got to be shifted out to later years that had a higher priority than those with the better off funding. So that's also a lot for community boards, particularly new community boards, to get their head around, because there's a time frame it's got to be done within.
And that is 25-26. So we do need to, we've got a couple of years, it's not that it's tomorrow, it's not this financial year, so we're not going to lose it if they do get carried forward from this financial year.
They cannot be carried forward.
Correct.
The next year, so
correct. So those, so there is still a question in my mind. I mean, this is working within the resources that we have within the business and the processes we have within the business and so on. So very much in my mind is, you know, how do we find the innovation that allows us to get ahead of the, you know, because these projects are important to our communities, and like you said previously, we don't want to continue to just push some of those projects that are important to the community out and out and out every year. So the idea is, how do we actually maybe can we chew off a little bit more than that? That might mean we bring some what we call carry forward projects back in if we find a solution, i.e. We start to get the community being able to deliver some of these on their own. We might go, actually, we moved that out, but we'd like to now bring that back to this financial year. So,
I think there was a note on one of the papers somewhere that a lot of new contractors have registered with the council now. So, what are the opportunities to use those contractors in the local areas to complete them?
We're proactively trying to get those things in place so that there is that opportunity. So, we don't know the knock-on of that at this point, but it may mean that we are bringing some reports to bring forward the money that we're essentially sending to next year. We might want to bring some of that back in, but we'll see how we go for the year.
I think as well, look, I was having a chat with Sarah before this meeting about just the sheer volume of work happening in the Auckland area alone. And this huge list of projects that we've got here for a small council, it's actually quite, it's extensive, and we've got so many of these towns and pockets all over our district, and a very small team servicing all of that that's under a lot of pressure right now. So I think we need to almost reflect and acknowledge the complexities that come of the nature of how we are at the moment too, because it's
in the room that I can say, no, he's not. I think we've got something like 70 odd projects in the, running around in that community resources space. So, there's in terms of the numbers, can't remember them, don't hold me to them, it's something like 70. How many workers and, it's like you start to get down to 9 and, bigger, but there's 70 in that space of projects, small amount, but a lot of energy to deliver, so.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, thanks, Rob. Has this been exacerbated by the Better Off funding, or is...
We've always had an issue with the carry forwards and a bit of a bow wave. The Better Off funding has just exacerbated that even further. So the good work that has been going on to, be able to deliver more, actually, probably is hidden in amongst the fact that the Better Off funding has also come on top of that. So, it's not that the team haven't been trying to improve their processes and get additional contractors in place and so on. They have, and there's been some really great work in that space. It's just that we now have this extra funding that came available that means that we have to look at this a little bit tighter again.
And the other piece of the puzzle is we're only looking at what hasn't been delivered. We're not actually matching it up to what has been delivered as well. So there's a whole missing component to what we've got here.
Because I just struggle with it a little bit, that we put out, load ourselves up with all these projects that we know we can't deliver. Why can't we just pull it back? If that 35 million is a magical number, why do we promote the $65 million worth of budget? It just seems pointless that we have these reports about how all the things that we're not, a lot of effort going to reporting on what we're not doing, rather than people should be, getting on and getting these projects underway. But, it's almost like we're setting ourselves up to fail.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're trying to thing. And like what I mentioned before, with I don't think anyone's comfortable with the situation that we're in, and we need to get to the point where we are committing to a program that we're, to Tom's point, with a reasonable degree of certainty, know that we can deliver and actually do. Because we are over-promising and under-delivering, and that's not through anyone's fault, especially with that Better Off funding coming through. But we do need to have a look at the whole system approach, which is a complicated system when we've got 9 community boards of various communities with wish lists themselves, and we've got the district funding of the roading and the toilets and all those things, and trying to merge them all together, which is part of what we're doing with this long-term plan, because we're going to be seeing some pretty big numbers with all of this stuff. And
I think most community boards would recognise that the Better Off funding's money that was given, and we need to use it. So I think most community boards would be pretty realistic and say, well, that needs to be dealt with a certain time. Around it. It seems we're loading ourselves up.
So the experience that I've got is that the discussions that have been undertaken, nobody's taking anything off the list. They'd rather it got put out a year than take it off the list. So the work is still valid work. It's just how do we deliver it in a timely manner. And I take your point. It's not an easy solution though at this point, but we're going to continue to find some further innovation, hopefully with the what can community actually deliver themselves.
Councillor Granny and Councillor Bones.
Thank you, Your Worship. At risk of sort of turning the conversation slightly, the report outlines what was done in the last 3 years. So I'm just very mindful, particularly of Rob's point around just looking at the dollars, but also the fact that in these previous years we've been coming out of COVID, and so the actual delivery of projects went from 25.9 through to 31.8. How much do we envisage that we will have in terms of overall capacity, with things like the fact that A, will hopefully be working all year, B, things like material shortages hopefully will settle, that those types of things will settle, and procurement potentially becomes easier. How much has that been taken into consideration?
Absolutely, that's what we're trying to do, is anticipate that. So like we said with the Rokahi, even though that's more, we're not all of that is that we're doing more work. It's just that it costs us a heap more in dollar terms. So I guess basing it just on a 31 million to deliver isn't quite appropriate given the escalation in costs.
No, I understand that element of it. What I was probably suggesting was that we won't have the same delays on being able to get hold of things, particularly materials. And so contractors, I would hope, will be able to become more efficient in their delivery as we move forward in time.
Absolutely. There will always be some carry forwards as well. There will be projects that span across the year, or weather hasn't played its part, and so we'll still have to do some of those things. But and a reasonable amount of that carry forward for this time is likely to have been because of materials and getting some of our contractors and availability and so on. So as best we can, we're the team, what they have seen, the trend that they're seeing, they're trying to take into consideration in this process.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Fran. Difficult spot there. But I'm encouraged to hear that you're entertaining the notion that the community boards might be interested in doing some of these projects themselves. And my suggestion would be, rather than spending time deciding which projects a community board could do, you go to the community boards and ask them which ones they would be interested in doing.
I think there needs to be a risk analysis as well. So I think it needs to probably be a bit of a partnership there, to be honest, because, and that's not to say that health and safety needs to be the excuse not to pass something, but we also need to be considering our responsibilities.
Sure, but before you do that, why don't you ask them what they're interested in doing? You might be wasting your time doing a health and safety analysis on a whole lot of projects and they don't want to do them.
Yeah, I understand the issue that you're talking about. If they're not comfortable in doing them, they sit on our program, even if they are a category 1. If there's nobody to actually deliver that in the community, then they still have to say it was an easy thing that we're calling a category 1, an easy consent that could be done by the community. If there's nobody in the community to deliver it, we still need to deliver it, I guess is the point. So, that will be a work in progress, I'm sure.
And one case in particular, these trees in Winton that apparently are, sounds like they're almost need felled or limbed. The contractor isn't able to do it, they've quoted, but they can't do it till next year. So that could be a project for a community if they wanted to get some contracts in, some quotes in. Is that a little bit outside of what would be comfortable community board?
Look, I probably
asking for quotes.
I probably don't want to commit anything at this point. I'd rather like go through that process and talk with the team about that. And
I think we need to keep it quite high level rather than looking at particular examples in this context. But I think the ability to innovate in the boards and approach examples like that with more context around them. But yeah, I think we avoid getting into the weeds. And
so when can we expect the community boards being approached around this innovation?
A little bit of time to settle. I think I need to work through that with my team first and understand the knock-on effect of that. One of the other things that's, being able to get the right designers and different people, not for this particular question, but for the earlier question, some of those things, the unknowns occasionally. So we might have a structural engineer whose workload is so heavily built up that we actually are trying to squeeze something into their program and waiting on that, or there could be a resourcing, issue within the team. So I can't 100% hand on heart say that we will absolutely deliver all of this program within the time frame, because I don't know what's another COVID something or other. It's not the COVID, but there could be something else that interrupts that. So I'm going to put my blood on the line, but I feel more comfortable with this sort of program than what was coming in with the carry forwards. So,
Councillor Duffy, did you have your hand up?
Oh well, I was going on about the Wyndham Edendale project again, and I mean you sort of said it's sort of higher level now and whatnot, but so that project could be open to some flexibility about what the community board could achieve in this next year, rather than it all going to 2024.
I think there's potential for some conversations about
So through you, Your Worship, I've just been in looking in the system. So as much as you've seen two reports that indicate we're taking the carry forward from 22-23 out to the long-term plan, and in this report there's $206,000 being proposed to move into the long-term plan. Actually in the annual plan for 23-24 there's about 406,000, proposing to move out to 206,000, leaving 200,000 in there for the community for that project.
So that would leave 200. Oh,
yes, so there's still money in there to continue on. Talking to some of the staff involved in it, the community board chair is aware of where it's at and is quite comfortable at this stage. And there's supposed to be a report around that specific one going somewhere in the next few weeks.
Wasn't that comfortable 24 years ago? But that
it's I'm not quite sure when the staff member might have spoken to her, but at least that was the staff members.
Good. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor Chamberlain?
You're not on this question, but like, if you've got toilets different toilets around the area, I mean, how far out would you go? If there was one, 3 years out, would you say, right, we're doing a group of toilets, and can we get the consent for all these toilets? And how far out would you? If there's one 3 years down the track, can we pull it into this year? And, if we're doing a group of toilets, or roofing contracts, saying, there's.
I believe there has been some of that work going on. And
just to get that efficiency,
Thanks, Brendan. We have been doing that on a few things. Brendan might have some examples, I don't know, or he might have some comment for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the sort of thing that I guess I've been talking about for a while now in the phasing of projects. So if you look at the draft 24-34 long-term plan, you'll see there are a group of toilets and they are for planning. So all of those toilets will be planned, and then the next year is construction, and then following on from that there'll actually be construction and planning occurring within the same year for the construction next year. So the importance of that phasing is that we get all of that design work done the year prior. We've got all our consents, we know where we're putting it, we've got land survey done, we've got geotechnical done. So we're actually setting ourselves up to succeed, rather than at the moment trying to deliver it all in one financial year. We're recognising that our important contractors, the design element, the geotechnical element, are already sort of up to here. Like I've said before, they don't sit around waiting on work to come from council, even though we pay on the 20th of every month, and that doesn't unfortunately give us special privilege. So that's the process going forward. Also talking about, and I was going to raise it in my management report anyway, but we obviously socialised with the community board chairs the phasing of projects and actually getting down with the community boards, with the project delivery team, the end asset owner,
invariably being Mark most of the time, the CPLs and someone from comms from Louisa's team, and actually sitting down and discussing those project elements at that time and actually getting alignment of the community board and the expectations around. So basically phasing our projects, calling it year 1 toilet planning, Fort Rose, year 2 Fort Rose toilet construction, year 3 Fort Rose toilet landscaping or something like that. So going back to what Fran was saying, categorising those projects and saying actually that's a Cat 1, Cat 2, it's a simple project. I think I called it at the community board chairs meeting. It's 100% goer for a community-led project or a community board-led project, as long as they're happy with it.
That's my question though, Brent, is if you had 6 toilets scattered around Southland, can they sort of be grouped into one?
100%.
We are trying, absolutely, and as we're looking into that program, so that's the idea as well around the carry forward, the bring forward. So we bring forward a project that we think actually there's some logic. It's right next door to such and such. Actually, if we do it at the same time, we can get the design work done with that project. So as best as possible, we're going to be doing that. Obviously, the long-term plan, there's an opportunity to have another look at that, what is in that program, and bring some of that thinking to that as well. So the idea is, yes, potentially we can do that, and the team have got the idea as one of a potential improvements. Can we do this and bring those forward? I.e., if you're doing a lighting, and you've got it spread over 3 years, and it makes more sense to deliver it as one lighting package with one contractor and one, tender and procurement process, then why wouldn't you, look at bringing the funding forward and into that? So we're definitely looking at that process as well.
It also features into the prioritisation side of things, to use that specific example. And if the community board at Fort Rose, for argument's sake, said the toilets aren't a high priority for us at the moment, it can potentially be put forward. But then you've got the Garston toilet, which coming into the tourist season, that's not fit for purpose and bursting at the seams, for want of a better pun. So yeah, it's how you prioritise that sort of thing too. You might have a cost saving by grouping them up, but the prioritisation means that it has to be done before the other one, and you can't afford to do them all at the same time, so you might have to. So that's kind of part of the complexity of trying to, I guess, shape everything.
Through you, Your Worship, a slight change in perhaps terminology. So I think Jane had perhaps called it a carry back. So where we have forecast something out for future and we have capacity and capability to be able to do it, I actually like the project terminology, a project acceleration report. I'm aware of perhaps the stigma around unbudgeted expenditure reports, and they're generally, in some cases, seen as not a good thing. So I was hoping if we could call it a project acceleration report. We're still asking for unbudgeted expenditure, but the connotation behind it is we're actually accelerating the program rather than. So yeah, I just wanted to float that as a possibility.
That's a right call.
Okay. Go from toilets to sewage. With the consent renewals in Napori and Belfast and Edendale and Wyndham, are there any issues with the yes going forward and pushing these forward? And will there be any additional costs?
Sorry, I missed it. Sorry, Mr. Riddle.
Consent renewals, Jeff, Edendale, Belfast and Manapuri. By pushing these forward and deferring them, will there be any issues with ES? Have any conversations been held, and will there be any additional costs around those projects being moved forward?
Your Worship, at this stage we've applied for a 5-year bridging consent, so an extension of the existing consent. Currently, all the construction period apart from Winton will fall within those 5 years, so there will be no additional costs for those ones mentioned, but Winton at this stage could get pushed out past that 5-year period.
Okay.
Thank you. This report actually caused me quite a lot of grief, really. I think that in looking at it and hearing what is actually behind it, isn't that the projects are actually being delayed, it's the budgets around them that are being delayed. I mean, there will be some projects, because for the use of an example, the Edendale Wyndham walkway, it sort of looked like you're going to stop work and we've only just managed to start getting going. And so I think that the report, I've got a few questions. One is, who is on the CDDG? Is it actually governance group or is it actually staff?
So it is staff. So we've got two group managers, myself and Michael are on that, and we have the asset managers and our project delivery manager, maybe somebody GM for finance as well. So that as a group, we are collaboratively trying to resolve this issue. It's not just one team that is it's not just Paul Brendan who's responsible for this delivery program. Yes, he might be the project delivery manager, but there's a whole lot of phases that the project has to go through and gateways it goes through before it should really end up with Brendan and his team. So we're trying a collaborative approach where we're actually identifying with the asset managers what's appropriate and what are the process improvements that we can make. So it's an internal.
Which is very logical because it actually breaks down the silos that we traditionally work in. So, good.
Does that group engage with the CPLs?
So Michael has the CPLs within his team, so that's the idea. The looking at what the community he's also obviously got Louise at this point, so around the engagement component as well.
So I have a bit of a problem with the acronyms that are used for your monthly reporting. But also the reports that we've received, I found that the breakdown on page 102.29, where the transport projects are actually identified out their status and their estimated value, I found that really useful to have an idea, and I think that that would be a good thing to use, bringing each various departments' expenditure back with not only the breakdown of as like having the status but in a dollar figure, but also the number that are there and whether it is community board or council driven or their project, because I think that gives us a lot of clarity around what we're actually being asked to do and maybe where it's falling down, because underneath this I hope that you're looking to see when these projects were actually put in, because it's unfair for community board or small projects that would make a world of difference to a few people and they're delayed because they're considered too small, like where that should sit. So yeah, I would like to see that coming back through so that we don't, because you're saying on there's a monthly reporting. Is that going to come to council, or is that going to come through just the reporting that we do on each department?
Yeah, I think there will be some piece. Obviously, we'll be looking at it from a different level, we'll be looking at a bit more detail. So we would definitely be summarising up, and I hear your message around this table on paragraph 29 being a useful table. And if we can do something with the dashboards or on the management report that highlights that a little bit better. That'll the stuff we'll be getting will be probably 5 or 6 lots of different things underneath this. So, but we'll keep this high level picture for yourselves as well. I like that idea.
The other side of this is how do you actually get stuff shifted off once and for all? Because I'm sure that the Waihopai Toitoi board have said many times we don't need to do anything with Fortrose toilet at this point in time because there's a bigger picture we're talking about. And it keeps coming back, whereas it's almost cluttering up the system. So how do you just put the line, give them the shunt forward out to the other end of the long-term plan?
probably very important conversation for the long-term plan. We will be making sure that the projects, if there are projects that that the community aren't interested in, or maybe it's something so it doesn't completely drop off the radar, it moves to year 10 or something and gets reassessed at.
Well, it's part of a bigger picture, you know.
From an asset management perspective, it may need to still be somewhere in the program, but it might be a lot further out than what we've got it at the moment.
Yeah. For I think we've been saying 3 years now.
Right.
Talking about the Fort Rose area there, so yeah.
I think just put context on them when they do move forward, so that a future council doesn't suddenly have this project appear and go, oh yeah, we need to do that. So yeah, putting a bit of awareness around the why it was shifted.
But I think a lot of that comes back down to how we view our asset management. And if they are only, if they're not integrated into what we do on a daily basis rather than just pulled out for the long-term plan view, well, it's like reporting for reporting's sake, and that's just bureaucracy gone mad, really.
Rob, I mean, this is my first LTP process, and it's quite hard to navigate. But I'm just kind of checking on the messaging that we are sending to communities, because I know we've sent out the Have Your Say booklet regarding the long-term plan and new projects potentially community boards are looking at, and it describes particular projects, including the 24-25 year, the 25-26 year, and the 26-27. So it paints a picture to the communities that, hey, here's some projects your community board's talking about. It suggests that they're going to be happening in the first 3 years of the long-term plan, but it doesn't really reflect conversations we're having about carryover. And just, I guess, following on from what Julia's saying is how many of these projects that are carryover and they're a continuation of plans, it might be different levels of how far the process is, but how much of this could be included in this out for consultation, or out for feedback at least from the communities, because it may be that some of these new ideas that new community boards have put in, from a prioritisation point of view, may be more important to a community than something that has been deferred and deferred and deferred. Just would hate to think that it's purely chronological and what we're saying might happen in the first 3 years of an LTP won't. It's going to be year 6, 7, 8 of the LTP, whereas the community might have preferred to kind of actually have some engagement on reprioritising some of that. So I guess just looking forward to seeing how this conversation stems through to community boards to weigh up new ideas, new long-term plan conversations with carryover, and I guess balancing it out. And the concern being what's already been sent out is purely focused on new project, and from what I can see, and from anecdotally from within the community board, I'm on some of those new projects being quite big ideas, but certainly wanting to see carryover projects completed would be the priority. But there's a nature of, if you don't add it to the list, it won't make the plan, it won't make the budget. So I don't know if it is sending the right message of a new plan, a new idea might be delivered in 24, 25. The conversations we've had in the last two reports suggest that that might not be the case unless it's a very low-hanging fruit project, which hopefully the community could do on their own. So, like I say, I'm new to it, but I get following closely how this information is going to get back to the community board. They'll ultimately make some decisions on prioritisation as well. Not just through matrix either, I guess.
I think there's a lot of value in your newness and the observations that you're bringing to the table. I think it carries a lot of weight. And while you've been discussing that, it's reflecting in my head the community board plan, which we're not kind of there at the moment with it, but that's the tool I think that we need to be sort of utilising to get all this stuff in, so that it reflects what you're talking about. Look, I know what you're saying, and it's been a kind of rhetoric in the past where if you want to get a project done, it has to be in a long-term plan, because otherwise it becomes that phrase unbudgeted expenditure that no one likes, and trying to get that into that plan. But I think, yeah, once we get to that point of equilibrium with having everything kind of perfect, which we're all striving to do, we'd have those really sound community board plans that actually become, when you combine all 9 of them together with what we're doing as a district, the long-term plan in its entirety. It feels like I was on the Stewart Island ferry a couple of weeks back, and it was pretty rough and very rough, and the bow wave coming through with all of the stuff, and the guy next to me said, "Don't worry, it gets good about halfway." And I was looking forward to that halfway point, and I'm still looking forward to that halfway point here where the roughness stops and we actually get to enjoy the scenery around us. But I think if we carry on working with this kind of stuff in mind, we will get there. We've had some. Oh, sorry, Sarah. Yeah.
Thank you, Wish. I think just taking that a step further, I think there's some of the comms that have gone or potentially going to go around what the proposed board projects are actually aren't in the board plans right now, and that actually gives me a great deal of concern. So, you know, when we actually think about the amalgamation of, and I think that's partially because some of these are district funded projects that are actually taking place in community board areas, but actually there's no visibility of that at all right now, and that we have to find a way of actually addressing that, because when you look at the amount of consultation, Rob's already referred to it, some of these ideas actually become completely inappropriate or irrelevant. And I just want to go back to the point around getting community boards to take responsibility for projects. And I think we just have to be, I'm going to flip that on its head and be very, very mindful that they're appointed into governance positions, and that asking them to take on operational responsibilities, we have to check whether they've got capability, capacity, and appetite to do that, because I know that probably council is going to require some form of reporting around it that comes back up into staff, and I just would caution a little bit around us trying to get our community boards, who are already, some of them, under quite a lot of pressure in terms of workload. You know, they've all got day jobs as well.
So, through your worship, in terms of that, I think community-led is probably something we should be using, not community boards. I think we're trying to interchange the two. It's community-led. That may be that there's a community board person on, you know, that is part of that team that's doing the community-led, but I take your point. Totally understand the issue that you're raising, so thank you for highlighting that and making a clarity for that.
I think we need a clarity around that. I am absolutely 100% for community-led, absolutely. And I guess that goes to the other point I was talking.
And also noting that one-size-fits-all approach, that we don't want, like, the boards are all different and there's different skill sets and capacities in each of those boards, and recognising that, so we're not sort of pigeonholing them to all behave exactly the same as well, so having the capacity to have those differences, I think. But yeah, very valid points.
And through worship, just in terms of the community board, the link to the community board plans, I think it's an absolutely, you know, ideal. That's an ideal place to get to, because that shows the connections and linkages. Hopefully the governance group that we're setting up to try and talk about that will actually also be part of that conduit to allow those things to be looked at. Probably not going to be highest on my radar at this point in time, but definitely something that we as a team will be looking to see that connection.
None of us should actually have surprises.
Correct.
In our areas of projects that we don't even know about.
Yeah. So even if we can report till those plans get updated, we should still be doing that. So good.
Well, I was expecting some really good discussion from this report, and that was delivered really well. So yeah, really appreciate that, everyone. And if we go to the recommendations that we've got now on page 88, 98.
Sorry. D approves the amended list of projects identified below.
So that's on your handout.
Yep.
Plus a further 6, yeah.
And noting in recommendation E that we're either going to agree or disagree to split the unbudgeted expenditure process and introduce a mechanism to pull forward or accelerate funding where projects are already identified in the LTP. So the unbudgeted expenditure application remains in all other instances. So we need to decide whether we're going to agree or disagree on that one. Councillor Menzies?
Can I just clarify that all the community boards are now aware of the proposal to shift some of those from 2023 to following?
We are going through the workshops with them at the moment, so I'm going to say that no, not necessarily.
I just wonder, on the basis of no surprises, given we're already asking to agree to that today, without their input, how can we communicate with them today that we've kind of made that decision in terms of plans they had in place at the community board level?
What I was hoping was the conversation through the workshops. If there was $1 million that we would be, lay it on the table if we wanted the report. I'm just a little bit cautious of the time frame for our long-term, because these numbers also have an impact and a flow on to our long-term plan. We're really trying desperately hard to, try and pin down numbers for a long-term plan and see how big an issue we've got in terms of sorting out year one, particularly because that jumps up with the bow wave.
I understand that, and we've got a decision to make today and the time pressures that are on there, and some community boards have had the opportunity for the workshops prior to this, so they understand that impact, but others won't, and they could be reading about it tomorrow. We haven't communicated with them about the background and content.
If we move it with the provision to make amendments based on feedback from the community board workshop, is that an approach we could take?
Yeah, I would support that because the island's due to discuss it next week.
It was always anticipated that the 1 to 2 million, we would be having those conversations and there would be some adjustments. So if there was one of the community boards went, oh, wait, I don't know, there might be some adjustment, and that will be a report that will come back. What I've seen so far is the first two haven't had any adjustment, but anticipating that hopefully through that process there will be a further report. So
yes, that we have the ability for it to come back for us to make an amendment if there was the desire from a board.
Yeah.
So would that be
I think we have a new G.
a new G? So are we comfortable with A through to D for a start? With D being that long list of projects. And then if we look at E, so is everyone happy to agree to split the unbudgeted expenditure process and introduce a mechanism to pull forward funding where projects are already identified in the LTP? So we're comfortable to, yeah. Well, we've either got to agree or disagree, so everyone seems to, there's lots of nodding, so we are agreeing for E. And then we've got F with that further reduction of 1 to 2 million required across the community resources projects to ensure a deliverable program is in place. Over the next month, staff will continue to investigate community resource projects that can be rephased alongside community boards as part of the workshops planned in September and October, and report back in November 23. The new G that Fiona may have already done in that time.
Just on that third line on that F, it's got community resources. Is it meant to be community resourced?
It's the title of, it is the title of the budget line, so.
We're trying to allow a report to come back to council if there are any changes proposed by the community boards from the engagement.
Those changes are only around what they would be happy to push out rather than the innovation
Yeah, the innovation's a separate piece to this.
Yes, correct, yeah. We'll continue that regardless.
Part of your long-term plan process.
Engagement.
Cool, do you want to read out what you've got?
Not the best. Agree that the project deferral / rephasing to the long-term plan 24-34 be reported to council should there be suggested changes post-engagement with the community board.
Can you read that again, sorry?
Agree that the project deferrals rephasing to the long-term plan 24-34 be reported to council should there be suggested changes post-engagement with community boards.
I think that would be.
We brought back rather than reported to you.
That's better.
Okay, so with...
Sorry, through you, Your Worship, is there, based on that statement, is there any potential for a contradiction with E here or not? I just want to be clear before we actually make a decision on this.
I think it almost supports E in my opinion, unless, do you think that there might be? Well, you obviously do because you've raised it.
Yeah, I just hope we're not potentially contradicting ourselves depending on how the table feels in terms of a split. If a percentage of us agree, but a greater percentage of us disagree, as an example, that would contradict that. Because we don't know what the outcome is, do we?
I think what we're doing at this point in time around this table, we're happy with what's in front of us, and we've got the provision for a community board or community boards to feed more information into this, which could then that would come back at a separate report. So
correct.
Yeah, so
as a separate report.
Okay.
One's about councillors agreeing, the other is about giving the opportunity for community boards
Absolutely.
to be part of this decision making.
Thank you.
Okay, so someone in a position to move A through to G? Councillor Duffy, do we have a seconder? Councillor Fraser? There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
I declare that. Thank you very much. It was a very good discussion, and it might be time to have some. So we'll come back at. We're going to come into the management report 7.10. I'll hand over to Neil. I think it's this one, I believe.
Thank you, and greetings everybody. I think the last item on the agenda was a recognition of some of the complexity and challenges of the projects that Council's been working on internally, but I just wanted to touch on some of the external things that have happened over the last term. It's very tempting actually, and I am resisting the urge to provide a scorecard or commentary on the past parliamentary term, but I would observe that while much of the legislation that's important to us has now been passed and is now law, the implementation of it is still yet to come. So practically, the next period will see us working with the Department of Internal Affairs, the National Transition Unit, with respect to the transfer of the three waters, and with the Ministry for the Environment with respect to the resource management transfer. And of course, being there is no law, we don't actually have any choice but to comply. I was recently on a call with the Auditor General, who was trying to explain why audit fees are going up, probably beyond the cost of inflation. But in that conversation, I did take away that acknowledgement, I think, that the Auditor General sees that the Local Government Act and particularly around the requirements of the long-term plan isn't really fit for purpose, but he's going to audit it anyway because that's what the law is. That is the challenge that we face for the next period, and I I am aware, because I've asked them, the Department of Internal Affairs have not put any budget aside to review the Local Government Act. So all these changes that are coming onto us, and that basically have implications for the Local Government Act. The Local Government Act is actually not getting changed. Well, nobody's planning to change it at the moment. So what that means is, looking ahead, the uncertainty that obviously we will all face from whatever the effects of the general election are. There's been some statements about what various parties might do with respect to some of the reform that's been passed. I just think we should acknowledge that it'll be quite a period of time before we know what it is that is likely to be the consequence of election. And probably that period of uncertainty will pretty much cover all of the hard parts of the long-term plan. So it's in that context that, as usual, we're going to be trying to do our best, but it's not going to be straightforward. I suppose, personally speaking, while the chaos of all the reform has been challenging, there are some themes in there that are actually worth saving, from my point of view. And the idea that maybe we shouldn't be so stuck in the confines of the Act or the previous legislation. So, for example, I'm thinking about some of the projects like reimagining the Mataura, that are sort of a different way of seeing how to address some of the historical challenges and the challenges that are ahead. Some of those opportunities by basically reverting back to the old standard ways of doing things. So, as well as the legislation changes and big stuff, we just touched in here about the alongside the Three Waters changes, which they've now renamed Affordable Waters, obviously the regulator Te Mata Arawai came into existence. And as some of the regulation around that is starting to take effect, we are seeing the effect of that on, say, the drinking water standards. And what may seem like a relatively simple change is fairly complicated, as you can see from the report. I put it in to illustrate, or asked for it to be put in to illustrate the effects of some of these things and how challenging they're going to be, because we basically have a water system that was largely compliant and now in many areas isn't compliant just because the rules have changed. Yeah, on top of, so the team are here to answer all the technical questions on the A3s. There are a couple of, there's a duplicate A3 on building solutions, and the Three Waters one's about to get handed out, for those of you who've noticed that. But I just, at the end there, I did want to touch on those three other projects that have come along over the last period, hugely significant, needed to be progressed, but weren't actually envisaged in any of the work streams that we were thinking about when we started the year. And those are the Rakiura Energy, the review of the airport at Makarori, and the emerging challenge around Blue Cliffs and the coastal erosion and the discovery of an unknown dump there. So those projects are significant. They do take a lot of time and resource, and they come on top of, and actually there was quite a good discussion before around the, I suppose, the random and complex nature of some of the government funding that randomly appears, like funding or or something like that, which we obviously want to take because we don't want to let that opportunity go, but it just adds to that churn and that. And I do see it as a challenge for Southland Mirihiku, that as government pulls out of more and more things that it normally does, and then offers money back on a sort of whatever their current interest is, we get these contestable funds. We jump through enormous hoops and enormous compliance to try and get that money, but it is quite disruptive. Better that we get it than not, but it does come at a so I'm going to hand over to the team if you've got anything specific on any of the A3s or any more of the technical stuff around the drinking water compliance.
Thanks, Cameron. Questions on A3s. Just a question on the building consents one from me with that graph. Once building consents issued, but to me it would be quite valuable to have building consents applied for as well in line with that. So you can see that increase in that green line and what's being issued, but is it reflective of what's being applied for as well, or is it?
Oh, thank you.
Did you get?
Right, perfectly articulated. I did think about putting that in, but then I did so many pictures. I thought, oh, not everyone's a data nerd like I am. I'm happy to add that. The consistency of consents coming into council has been quite consistent, actually. So we've not actually had a reduction in work coming in. We have had a reduction in work going out. Some of the key drivers of that is the amount of requests for further information we need to ask. We are having to repeat work on the same consents than we used to. We are doing rework on inspections more than we used to. When I pull that together into a graph that I didn't put in here, maybe I should have, the volume of work we're doing day to day versus the volume of work we're outputting, it's getting out of balance. And so even at last night's engagement session with industry, I proposed that we form a focus group to really look at that and work together on how do we adjust that, because there are some key influences causing it. COVID certainly kicked it off with replacement of products and materials, and other regulation changes like our H1 have also influenced it. So working together as these changes come through to prevent that continuing to grow is going to be really important.
Cool, thank you. That answered the second half of my question. So,
okay.
Anyone else got any? Do we want to step through each of these A3s while Julie's at the table? So, yeah.
Thank you, Worship. So, just to get a little bit more specific, the 43% of inspections that didn't pass, which is quite a high percentage, were there consistent themes in there that you are highlight with industry, or is it quite random?
There are some consistent themes.
Like, so that you can educate.
Yes, and that's why we really want to work together on a focus group on it. Some things that council are pulling out of it are really high level. So we are seeing an increase in the number of people not ready for inspections at the time of the inspection. And so what's causing that? Why are we seeing an increase in inspections being booked in advance when they're not ready? Sometimes that's just bad weather, you know? And so there are some things we can influence and change, other things we can't.
So, stop you there for a minute. So when it's bad weather, do you classify it as not passing?
We classify it as not passing if we show up for an inspection and the site is not ready. We should be notified that morning or the night before if the site is not going to be ready for an inspection, so that we're not driving all the way out to that site.
Okay. So not ready is equals a not pass if they haven't.
I would say that there aren't a lot of those that we see. We do try. So we can pull an inspection into two, and we can do what's called a part inspection. And so a part inspection, we can hold the remainder. There are only certain circumstances where we can do that though, so it gets a bit tricky.
Your Worship, would the 78% of building consents need further information? Is that consistent with other BAs, or is that, you know, like, is that a discussion from industry, from the consent guideline to out to the building industry? Is the, you know, like, is that? Yeah, is it normal?
It's a good question. In general terms, I would say yes. In specific terms, tomorrow is our workshop with our cluster. So we've had 6 councils process the same consents. The volume of RFIs coming out differed, but those consents would have received RFIs from all councils. So there is quite a bit of consistency in the percentages is what I believe will come out of that workshop tomorrow. The way we're getting there is what we really want to work on. The reality is there are time pressures on the design industry, and sometimes the time pressure is driving a submission of an application before it's ready and information is missing. Sometimes it is the change in regulations and understanding the application of those regulations that means something's been missed or not specifically addressed that now needs to be that didn't used to be. And sometimes it is just a simple quality check. If a junior's put an application together and a senior hasn't had a chance to review it, it can come into council just without having had that peer review done. There's quite a variety of factors causing the RFIs. That's why I really think we need to work together to resolve that and bring that percentage down. We don't want to send RFIs, we don't want to reprocess a consent more than once. They don't want to receive RFIs, they just want it to get through the system. So we really need to start changing the way that we audit is the way I proposed this to industry last night. We as council to date have really been looking at compliance to our accreditation requirements and getting ourselves up out of annual audits into biannual audits, because it's that window in between that we've got time to actually make meaningful change to our procedures and our systems. Now that we've created that gap, we have the opportunity to change our focus, maintain what we've achieved so we don't lose it, but change our focus with the capacity to the consistency of RFIs, the consistency of applications, and really working together on what needs to change to actually make this work better for everybody.
So did you have quite a good turnout at that engagement? Like, is it quite a far-reaching?
That one was a Tianao based, so we had, I'd say, about 25 people there. So that was good. We are looking to reach out to the design industry to hold another one. That one was generated, we were invited by placemakers, so it mainly focused on the building industry. There was a designer there, got up and spoke, and he was saying exactly the same thing. With the changes in H1 is what he was talking about. The way that a designer designs isn't necessarily easy to construct. So let's work together to make sure as these changes come through, we're talking about it, we're refining the process. It felt to me like we were all very much on the same page. So we do have a few more to go to really put that message out and set up those building blocks for a really effective focus group and engagement next year, which will, obviously will start kicking off this year.
I'm just going to ask you, sorry, just before I get to you, Tom, I'm just going to ask you a very in-depth, detailed question, apologies for that, but just to get my head around it. So with the RFI, do you look at the application holistically and do a whole lot of RFIs, or when you hit the first hurdle, does that then go out to the RFI and then potentially have that process repeated multiple times, or is it done as an application as a whole?
So as a cluster, we've agreed on what's an appropriate point at which to either refuse an application or send those RFIs, and it varies. If the request for further information responses aren't likely to have a significant impact on that design in its entirety, the processing officer will keep asking questions until they get to the end of processing and you get a complete list. If they get to something that's significant, and when I say significant, for example, one set of plans dimensions and another set of plans dimensions do not change, and that's going to affect the whole bracing calculation, they'll stop there and go, actually, this is quite critical. We'll send it back now and tell you what we found to date. The repeat cycle tends to come, in my observation, from some of those responses. So if the designer responds and says, oh, gee, yeah, I didn't see that, thank you, here's the plan, they actually need to make sure that response adds up with everything else in the paperwork. And if they haven't thought of that, or they've been rushed, and they send that response back, we then go, oh, okay, well, that now actually doesn't add up with these other 5 criteria, and we'll send more questions. So there is a bit of navigation if a change is significant to actually bring that full set of plans into alignment with whatever that change is.
Councillor O'Brien.
Through you, Your Worship. 3 of us were at a meeting last night in Te Anau that South presented. There's some reoccurring, I guess, consistent themes going on with not only what was being spoken about last night from their perspective, and also the report that they gave last week, which were around their what they prioritised in terms of what was most important. And it was around data, and it was around housing, and it was around regulatory issues surrounding that, which is obviously quite a big part of your space. It was really refreshing to see that, that members of the community were standing up and saying, yes, actually this aligns with some of the pressures that are associated with what we're dealing with. You know, we need more houses. We need them. We don't need them next year or the year after. We need them now. So if we think about all of that, and in terms of prioritisation of our resources, do you feel that we have the tools in terms of the grassroots stuff? Do we have enough builders? Do we have enough like the supply of building materials? Do we have enough? You know, we can do all of this, but when we actually press go, do we have those resources to be able to support this? Do we need more?
The question is, do we have the capacity in-house to handle the increased load?
To handle an increased load if we work on the housing issues that we
Those guys said.
So yeah, if we work on the housing issues to generate more supply, do we have capacity to process the resource consents?
So the resource consent side of things,
the building
consent
consent.
side. Okay, good. Okay, our team have been on a 4 to 5 year journey to build ourselves up to the point that we can meet capacity. We are currently forecast to meet capacity, even if that demand increases slightly. However, it is very consistent, our building capacity in Southland. I would say as far as skilled workers and I'm talking, engineers, tradespeople and designers, we don't have enough. And so that actually maintains a consistent pipeline into council. If we suddenly unplug that, we have got engagements with contractors that help us to address those peaks in processing for council. And so I do genuinely believe we've got capacity in another 6 or 7 months to absolutely address that. Right now, we've just taken on our last round of cadet BCOs, and we are training quite hard and quite heavily. It has impacted our compliance to timeframe. I was very excited. I am very excited that we're about 6 months away from that turning point. And once we get there, our compliance to timeframes will be bang on. The way that we interact with our community and deliver our customer service will be adapted more to what's being asked for. And that is that capacity as well to plug and play our skill sets where it's most needed and where that high demand starts to come through. We've got an agreement with our cluster. We're working really hard together to share workload across us. So if Southland suddenly has a push and we've got a spike, we actually have the support of 10 other councils to help us with that work, in addition to the contractors that we've got engagements with. So we've set ourselves up for that long-term stability for our council and that long-term service delivery that our community deserves. Right now, we're still a little bit 6 months off it. Once we've hit that point, and that point really comes to the competency assessments and of those juniors coming up.
I suppose this isn't just a Southland issue either. You know, there's these sorts of issues right across the country. I'm sure it's a recurring theme around housing. So I'd probably be somewhat sceptical in terms of shared services from other areas coming to Southland to help in that space based on the relative need. And I'm not saying that from my perspective, I'm saying it from, say, a population-based perspective. I know that, we sent people up north under that emergency situation and scenario, but unless we had the same thing, I'd be a little bit sceptical about other parts of the country sending skilled and unskilled staff this way. So, but I guess we'll watch the space. Yeah.
Definitely a watch this space. What I find is the main centres around New Zealand do have more significant peaks and troughs. So 4 months ago, I think it was, a lot of those main centres had a trough. And we used that. We got them doing some technical audits for us and helping us with some regulations. We had it really consistent all the way through. So there will be, I think, times that we can leverage from it. We're not banking on it, but we're prepared for it. It will be really interesting.
Just looking at the graphs, I really like these A3s, and they're nice and clear and easy to sort of visualise. That one down the bottom with the customer interactions, RFSs. So could you just elaborate what an RFS and your team would be? Because is a high number good or is a high number bad?
High number is the volume of touch points with customers that come through either phone calls or emails and are captured in our request for service system. So typically if someone picks up the phone and speaks to the team and has an answer immediately, that's not tracked through an RFS. If we need to call them back or if we need to pass it on to another member of staff, we'll track that through the request for service to make sure that a customer gets an answer in a certain period of time.
So that could be a question on a current build or something, or a question on a new build, or any kind of... Are there any further questions for John?
Yes, just one. I'm a data nerd as well, so I guess something I'm wondering in future data collation is how easy would it be to start getting a bit of a location-based overview of data in terms of not necessarily district-wide how many consents are being issued or applied for, but how many relate to Te Anau, Winton, and other areas, knowing that if there's increased capacity that are further away from maybe where the resources are, whether that means there could be to look at kind of increasing capacity in the areas of the district. So how easy would it be with the current framework to extrapolate that kind of data of geographically where are these numbers coming from?
We have got the ability to represent it on a heat map graph. That was built a few years ago, and so that's based on the 5 different wards that we have. I can produce that today. If you want me to break that down into further areas, I would need to put in a request to our IT team to build that capability, and I would say that within a month they'd be able to have that probably, so very much possible.
I think it just could be quite interesting data to align with, I guess, some of the things we've been talking around housing, getting a bit of a real-time view of how that looks in the district.
Tying that in with the new data collection that Great South is actually coordinating as well through that, connecting all the dots together.
So if I do that by heat map and by community board breakdown, what that would look like is the community board's the area, and the heat map changes colour if there's a high density of consents in that area. So it gives you a nice easy visual of where in the location or geographic area is the building happening, and is it quite dense there. Is that what you'd like?
I mean, it'd be interesting for me personally, but I'm just one person.
That could get swayed a little bit by your Wintons and your Te Anau's that have got the bigger population. So, like the number of consents relative to population, like you'll get a really strong area in that really dense.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of imagine what the data would look like, but I guess it's imagining it versus seeing it and having it as a discussion point.
Sorry, can I just clarify that? Are you saying, because I am a data nerd, that a bar chart would probably be easy to digest because it's actually numbers and potentially based on geographic area and population rather than just a heat map which gives you an indication that you're going to
kind of 6 of one, half a dozen the other, whichever's probably easier to predict.
I'll have a play and see what we come up with.
Thanks, Julian. I appreciate the detailed discussion as always. So if no one's got any further questions for Julie, we'll move on to the community developments.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
And Mark is not here, so if there are any pressing questions,
Thank you, Your Worship. I've just got a question around the PO project, and obviously there's expression of interest out to the market for the design of the PO. 2 of those were outside the Southland District Council area. So are we working with ICC and Gore about how those are funded, or are we only doing the ones that are in the Southland District Council area?
So through you, Worship, it's ICC is the only, the 2 are located with an ICC, one at the Marae, and the other one in Bluff. So that's where the 2 PO are outside.
Sorry, I thought there was one in Hokanui area as well. Yeah.
Taylor Park, and I think it's in our patch.
Right. Just within our boundary. So I don't know if anybody else has got any update on that. I believe we are, but I'll need to double check before I clarify that for you. So.
Yes, because some of the funding's coming in, so presumably part of that share will go to ICC to complete that work, and if they're not in agreement with it, then we're just doing the Southland District Council.
And my understanding is that the one of the Marae might be helping with that contribution. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll for their share of the contribution.
Yes, and yes, what that contribution is across all.
Correct. I understand the question.
Thank you.
Questions on that one? We don't have BD at the moment for the environmental health, but if there are any potential questions, we can potentially find an answer to, but it looks like everyone's...
Sorry, Rob, just, like horse here, but going back to the community facilities, I guess maybe just refreshing our memories a little bit around the contract performance for things like mowing contracts. And I know Mark usually deals with that, doesn't he? Yeah, he's not here, so I don't know if anyone can comment, but as I say, we're experiencing some, spring growth and it's taking off. Do we feel comfortable that we've got the level of service required to sort of cover that? Because I know that quite a few people, a lot of RFSs surrounded it last year, and I think some of it was due to, well, we just didn't have the staff at certain times, and so the level of expectation or the performance associated with the expectation didn't quite align. So do we have any comment around that at all, or are we pretty much the status quo?
I'll take that back.
Other than the comment that's on the actual report, basically saying the staff will be monitoring the contractors to ensure. So I think there's a recognition that there has been issues in the past, and my discussion with the team, I think they'll be keeping an eye on that and going through. And again, the RFSs are probably the key gauge that if people are seeing issues, that they actually bring it in. And then
Thank you.
No, I'm just told from the experts at the back that there's a good auditing program in place now to give the staff the level of confidence that the contractor's meeting expectations. Right? Great.
Just a general question across a few of these. We've still got on there the around the risk areas, the COVID-19 supply issues. Are we kind of through that and can take this off that and just look at supply issues generally across those ones? And just around the environmental health, the graphs in there are over the annualised year. Is there a reason that it's over the year as opposed to our financial year? Difference, I suppose, makes it easier reading across each of those A3 report. No need to answer now if we just
Take it on board.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right, so we've got the forestry report up next, and I see Stu in the corner. Does anyone have any questions on that one at all? Looks fairly straightforward to me. The program delivery, there's quite a lot of discussion around this already today, so I can't imagine there's anything new in there, but if anyone's got anything.
I think I did. Find it again, the Healthy Homes Project. I wanted to ask what that was. Is that in the community housing? I'm just trying to find it. I've written it.
It's in the new project started list.
145.
Yeah, page 145, the new project started. The Healthy Homes Project, is that for our community housing? Or is it something else? I just wanted
Through
to
you,
know.
Your Worship, it is. It is compliant heat pumps, extractors, and
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
I've just got a comment on this one, just looking at the Athens Tennis Court, it's in pre-work, and we were talking earlier about sort of innovation and community-led projects. So I drove past that the other day and saw tractors and farmers' utes, and that was clearly a community-done project with them doing the work on their own tennis court. So there's an example of some of that work being done, so I thought that was quite cool.
Absolutely, thank you.
That's amazing.
You're just really helpful on this report, the program delivery, that you've got the completed works in the last reporting period, because we should be able to marry that then to the others. And although it's a bit of an exercise going and reading through and marrying it up, but I guess if we have a number of, we know what the number is of those carry forward, so it could even be 4 out of the 5 or the 4 out of the 10 completed. That would also give us a measure of progress, and we can check back across that other list. That comes back to your point earlier on. We need to recognise the work that has been done, also, rather than what is not being done.
Cool, and we'll go back up for the second round of the Building Solutions team one. We've got the transport next. Have we got any on this one?
There are any questions? Might get scot-free then.
Good not to be.
I just want to overall timeframes for the speed management.
Yeah, so the intent, I know there's been a bit of jigging around based on how full the agenda's on, but the intent was to come back to the next council meeting, draft proposal. I think it might be the meeting on the 4th of October, and then on the 5th to go out, or that was the original time frame, then the 5th to go out to consultation.
Oh, October.
Yeah, from memory.
And the
look at the actual
format
implementation.
of that is by survey, or what else?
Sorry.
The format of the consultation.
That'll be publicly advertised with the document.
Just go on the website and stuff like that.
Yeah, various comms, just like we would do with any sort of bylaw process.
Yeah, okay.
And we've been engaging with the boards and sent some pre-engagement out already with various stakeholders, schools.
And just where are we with parking?
With the roading bylaw,
Yeah.
That's with the policy team. I know they've done a little bit of work, but I believe that with the total workload, it's getting balanced in along with the consultation on the long-term plan, following the works program for this year.
Just one more question too. Sorry, we'll wait till you're just ready to sit down. Just the dust suppression, you got the priority for that coming month for an options report. So is that getting marketed again as the same kind of scale as last time?
Correct. So through one of the workshops, sort of presented on some ideas around should the format be the same going forward, should we change how the service offering in essence. So that report is just trying to formalise some of that discussion that we've had, and then put that into a report with a recommendation on how we actually go forward. Yeah, in mind we sort of get into the critical end of the season to implement anything. So that's the intent, and the learnings from what we have done, any of the issues, how we might rectify those issues, if any. So yeah, it's trying to cover all of that.
Thank you. Let's ask one of my questions, because it's also about the performance today will come through in that report, which
correct. So
yeah, just in terms of the bridge renewals, you won't have an update for us about which bridges yet because it's still under tender.
So I can yes and no. Yes, in terms of there's 2 that are still out to market, or 2 packages that are still out to market. There's one closing tomorrow, and then a further package closing in 2 weeks' time. So in terms of how much we'll actually be able to achieve, we won't know until we actually see the pricing for the other bridges, and then we'll be able to, based on the pricing we've received for the whole package, be able to have a better idea of what we think we'll be able to achieve or won't. At this stage, I mean, we might be surprised by the pricing, but we've put a few extra bridges out beyond what we're estimating, with the proviso that it does depend on what the total package looks like based on our budget, so we can maximise the budget that we have.
When do you think we might be in a position to advise the community of those bridges that will be replaced? Likely, because you don't.
Yeah, so what we could do is look at the ones that we think we can deliver, based that we've got a reasonable degree of confidence on what we can deliver. Maybe advise of the provisional items that are sort of subject to budget availability.
I guess I'm not wanting to pressure you to put announcements out there that then you might have to backtrack on, but once they're confirmed, then do we just release a media?
Yeah, we can do a release on.
Let the communities know that they have been approved and.
Yeah, we can do that. I suppose the caveat with the provisional ones is just that they are provisional and there's no guarantees at this stage.
Yes, but that may be better left until you've
So
actually got better. We just talk about the confirmation of those that are be replaced as opposed to making expectations that then.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. So I'd say probably by the end of next month, by the time we've gone through the tenders they've closed, we've done the evaluation process and advised respective contractors if they've been successful or not, at the end of next month.
Thank you.
Sorry, Hartley, this isn't really directly related to the report, but it's more just looking at things like the risks associated with our assets, likes of what Christine was talking about, our bridges and roads and culverts in general. You know, it looks as if, according to MetView, you know, as of pretty much tonight and tomorrow and the next day, we're going to have a significant amount of rainfall. And I know that that this is probably more of an EMS sort of space, but I mean, do you have communication from those other areas to say, hey, look, you know, here are some hot spots of concern, you know, and accordingly, are there ways that we can sort of go out and try and not only inform people, but also sort of mitigate against some of those incredibly heavy rainfall events? And, you know, you could argue if we're going through an El Nino period, we might get a few more of those over this spring than what we might have 2 years ago. Are we having those conversations?
So yes, we do have a conversation and with EMS, and they do advise us. We get advice on where it might be. They are pretty good at, particularly road levels, advising of where they're reaching trigger points. Probably a very common one that we get is down below Matoda. They'll actually give us a bit of a heads up saying we think these roads could be underwater at this time. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get your contractors out there and advise, you know, put up road closure or flooding signs. Some of those hotspots, over the time, we've built up a pretty good record of where they are, and we've got permanent signs that just fold open and closed. Top of Castle Rock, Castle Rock's another good example. We've got semi-static signs there that the contractors will throw out. We do have to monitor. Sometimes it's not just a case of the rain event, depending on where it is. It's actually those tidal areas. It's actually having a look at where when the high tide mark might hit and how that coincides with the flood. So yeah, we do a bit of liaison that's going on. We try and, not always practical, because sometimes you might find debris or something washes down into a culvert and blocks a culvert that the culvert was perfectly fine when we drove past.
Sure.
So we can't.
So there's only so much stuff you can.
So we do try.
And, yeah. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know. So based on that forecast, if we believe that forecast is accurate, have you had any direct conversations with those people in order to say, hey, well, look, there's so much we can do here to mitigate against this sort of stuff, but yeah, we're guessing a little bit here. I mean, have those conversations taken place?
Yeah, a good example is probably Otara and the Main Street Bridge. Following the last snow event, there's quite a significant amount of snow melt that affected the tributary into Upper Rima. That got pretty close. And so with this forecast, they've been in touch with us around that and what we can do and sandbagging and where those sorts of things are. So yeah, there's definitely for some of those hotspots.
I think it's probably fair to say as well, those alliances probably intrinsically do that kind of work as part of the contracts as well, and they at that local level will liaise with certain things and be quite proactive. Questions for that? You didn't get off scot-free.
The road drawing quality, the quality heading, the road drawing scores. How often are you doing road drawing or using it?
So we do it continuously in terms of through our alliances and our monthly auditing. We'll do snapshots of the network as part of the ongoing monthly audits. But then from a council point of view and the score that we utilise to report against our long-term plan, we do that at the end of November, start of December. And that's my team goes out. We try and condense that to around a 2.5 week period of getting around the entire road network and generating a district-wide score, so a snapshot once a year of what the total district's looking like. And that's the one we utilise for our LTP reporting. The other ones is just on a monthly basis on our proportional network audits to keep an eye on what's occurring across the network.
Thank you for that, Hartley. We'll move on to our final one, which is your free orders one. Cameron's probably covered a lot of initial summary of our legislation stuff. Are there any questions? Sorry, Sarah.
Through you, Worship, just that Manapori, there's a decision been made on the no pond issue. Can you explain that?
Yes, Palmer, through you, Your Worship. So we've had multiple workshops with community groups, the Te Aneo liaison groups, in relocating the pond for the Manapori township. For those that don't know, the pond is adjacent to the township, very, very close to it, and once the new treatment goes in, we'll be making noise. It's just Mother Nature doing the treatment. We've looked at other areas being around the Manapori airport facilities. What we have now is a design being pushed through where we can go pondless. So I wouldn't say it's finalised, but that was the preferred option coming from the liaison groups and council. So we're just going to explore that and see where budgets sit.
So will that mean that the existing pond then gets filled in, or how will that get?
Through Your Worship, it'll be decommissioned, and then we have broached ideas with community groups around turning it into a nature wetland or some area that the community could benefit from.
Like a swimming pool?
That's for a little while.
Just where you at with the Eastern Bush, because the pumps have been pumping and it's been running down the road, so where you at with that project to get that back up and running?
3 years, Your Worship. So we are still waiting on radio to come in. We, for those that don't know, we lost communications between our two reservoirs. So we've got 2 of the 3 radios now in service. We just need to wait for the third one to come in and get in service. So it's not completed yet, but it's very, very close.
There's been a lot of water going down the side of the road.
Yeah, I have spoken to the contractor and they assure me they're managing that, but yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. It seems to be just a time there were accidents occurring, and there's one where there was a vehicle crash and extensive work needed to be completed that was reasonably expensive and ongoing. So in terms of the insurance claim, we're presuming that it'll all be fine and the council be reimbursed totally for the costs around that.
So, through Your Worship, is that regarding the Riverton Bridge? Is that?
Oh no, there's also the Riverton Bridge, but this is the one out at Edendale Way. Yes.
Okay, I have a report following this on an update on that, but
Yes.
we have been in contact with the insurers, the motor vehicles insurers. They can't act upon it until they know our total cost, so we still don't have a total cost yet.
So is that different to the worm farm?
No, sorry, that is the worm farm.
Right, that we have in the report here. Okay, and the other one for the Riverton Bridge, so that's all been fixed, and was that covered by insurance as well?
It's still in the process, so I'm still yet to get finalised costs. The work has been 100% complete and returned back to full service. I'm just waiting now on final costs coming in from Downer, and then we have spoken to the insurers. They're fully aware of it. Again, they won't act upon it until they understand the total liability of the cost.
When we were talking earlier about capacity and these incidents happen, that takes staff out of their day-to-day work as well. So there's extensive days lost in what might have otherwise been staff would have been working on.
It's correct. I mean, when we lost the Edendale one, for instance, we're out there all weekend trying to mitigate and find options. We're working with our contractors, trying to work out solutions to keep the plant going, because in that situation we lost total ability to treat wastewater, and we're looking at having to truck it away and come to solutions. So it becomes almost like an EMS, a small emergency management team, and just structuring and trying to work out the solution and providing continuous service to our communities. So it does take its toll, it does.
And that's in fact what happened in the end. They did receive a continuous service with the wastewater. So again, I think it's just acknowledging staff's work around responding to those, and then we see there's carry forwards and other things as well. So it all links in, doesn't it? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, looks like, thanks very much, Jeff. And that brings us to the recommendation that we received, and this one, day three is pretty good, and it's been an iteration over time, and they don't write themselves, so it's it's good to have that level of information in front, and the lack of questioning doesn't mean a bad report, it almost means a good report. So just acknowledge what has gone to that, and I'm happy to move from the chair that we received that report. The question.
I don't even have to say anything now. I just noticed, obviously, that last handout report is 3 waters, but it does refer to waste as well with the recycling contracts. And I was just wondering, a strategic planning priority that I was trying to find on a previous A3 included some of those green waste discussions up in northern Lassa, and it doesn't appear to be coming in this A3 anyway. I'm just wondering if there's any update. I realise grants away, so I'm not sure if anyone can inform whether there's any work going on in that space.
Sorry, I can confirm through your worship there is some meetings coming up, and I'm sorry if I can just look at my phone if it comes through today. So close landfill investigation to the Outer Lassa will be the 11th of October, and another one in the 3rd of October. And Waihopai Toitoi, there'll be one on the 24th of October and one on the presentation will be on the 24th.
So they're the community board meetings?
Correct, yes they are.
Cool, thanks for that. Cheers, Jeff.
Thank you.
Having that information on hand just like that, that's good. Cool, so I've moved it. Do we have someone in a position to second? Thank you, that's least. All in favour, please say aye. That was carried. The next item on the agenda is the mural update, which is a new item on the agenda, and apologies for it being a local update this time, but in future agendas will be a proper report on there. And I had a good chat with the governance team last week around this as well, and getting a bit of an update from the community board as well. So we're getting because we do a council update to the community board, but it doesn't necessarily come back the other way. So looking at the logistics around potentially doing 3 or 4 boards at a time for each of the council meetings, so getting a bit more of a full circle kind of approach. So I'll just go through some of the things of note that I've been up to. The one that I've just got back from, Cameron and I went to Wellington on Monday, Tuesday for, like I said earlier on, the future by local government now. But it's all being driven very much by our sector, and it was a LGNZ orchestrated workshop, which was, I'll find on my phone, if you bear with me, the vision at the start and at the end, which there was a lot of debate about whether it was actually a vision or outcomes, but semantics aside, localism, is it the final one? Localism delivers a better future for our communities that everyone can be proud of. Councils are true tītiriti partners working with iwi, hapu and runanga to invest in intergenerational wellbeing for all. Power and funding devolves from central government to communities through local governance. Funding and financing disparities are resolved, with councils having the right level of resourcing to deliver for their communities. There's no more unfunded mandate. Councils are much more attractive places to work with visionary local leaders, enhancing their community's mana. More people stand and vote because they believe in the difference local government can make. Councils create vibrant and resilient places that reflect and serve the communities, and central government trusts and enables local governance to deliver. So, fairly, I think those are more outcomes than
Definitely outcomes. That's
than the vision, and there was a lot of discussion around that. But we did a session with the 17 recommendations from the Future Local Government panel, and a post-it note session with each of the recommendations around were 3,500 post-it notes at the end of the day. But going through whether we agreed with them or disagreed with them to sort of inform future discussion. The aim is to try and get to a nationalised consensus, which Tom was at the one in Christchurch where trying to get a consensus, I couldn't get a consensus on getting a consensus, and it turned into consensai. So we're sort of trying to getting a shared position. It was quite interesting as the day went on. The number of people rejecting change to less and less. So I think that was reflective of people getting tired rather than. So next time we might have to turn the questions around the other way and do it. But it was quite interesting seeing the common threads across the whole sector, and then some differences in there. And I mean, even having a chat to councils around some of the stuff that we've talked about today with. The challenges that we face with having those multiple towns spread out so far, as opposed to being a council with just one town, noting that ICC had a project list in the paper the other day. It's very easy to list your projects if you've got one city to focus on when we've got all of those. So, yeah, really good discussion with various other people up and down the country, and Sam's, the LGNZ residents, just sent in a summary out, so I'll forward that to everyone. Also caught up with Doc while we were up there, and you know, we was heard on Radio New Zealand. I luckily was in Wellington at the time, so managed to go to the studio there and had an interview with Catherine Ryan and Sahana, one of the operators on the island, and Aaron Fleming from Doc. So that was worthwhile. WasteNet, this is all what Matt was talking about before. We had a meeting the other day, and myself and the chair of WasteNet, who's the Deputy Mayor of Gore, Keith Savell, we went to the Invercargill City Council meeting and actually made ourselves available for questioning from the Invercargill City Councillors, because some of the discussion that came out around WasteNet from that council, so we just wanted to sort of almost set the record straight there and open ourselves up. So if there's an appetite for this council as well, Keith has said he can quite happily come and talk here. There's a lot of discussion in WasteNet around the recycling separating out the glass, which on paper sounds easy, but for our council to have a separate bin and a separate collection over the geographic spread and the number of bins that we need to get, we're looking at a cost of about $1.4 million, and annually an additional 956,000 additional cost annually. So that was one of the examples of and this was discussed at the ICC meeting, where you've got a shared service, but you've got some differences inside that shared service, and it doesn't stop the shared service from working, but it just means that we might have to have a different solution to ICC and Gore, who have got that smaller collection base. So we're basically saying we're not against separating the glass because that's causing issues at Recycle South, but we might just have to look at a different approach, and that'll come through our long-term plan process. So there was an initial drive to move that through quite quickly, but obviously with some of these differences, and I think it's actually mirrored into ICC's long-term plan as well, so it's just going to fall into that process. And something else that's come out of that committee is they've opened up, which they used to have in the past, community grants for waste minimisation. So that's up to 50k, and I think I've talked to Matt and Sarah already, and I can forward out the application form details. So that opened yesterday, or the day before yesterday, 18th of September, and it's open till the 30th of October for applications. Essentially for anything that's going to reduce waste and maximise resources in the Southland area. So that community groups, that's initiatives. And there's also a presentation from Kiwi Skips who are looking at, it's called hot rot composting. It's basically machinery that does, I was trying to remember what the output was, but it was a reasonable input and output, 9,000. Thank you, Fran. So that's going to be based in the Invercargill, and I had some chats to them about, well, you got to transport the stuff to Invercargill, but to Matt's discussion around those localised solutions, there are smaller versions of that, and I guess there's a potential to have a look at that kind of technology in some of our towns as well. So I'll forward you those details there, but it looked like quite a cool setup for composting, and all of this is kind of addressed around that waste minimisation and the fact that we need to pay for everything that's going to landfill now, so if we can divert anything away and get a better end use for it, then that's valuable. Had a really productive second community board chairs meeting in Winton with all the board chairs. Those have been going really well and have been really well received, and went through a bit of the project prioritisation discussion, and what was on the agenda today was presented there to the chairs as well. It was really good just hearing what's happening in each of those, and that's why it'd be quite nice to bring that to the council meeting as well, what they're up to in the areas. The Stewart Island, on the 7th of September, Stewart Island Community Board put on a public meeting to go through a number of the initiatives that they're working on, and it was timely with the Wharf announcement about the restrictions, so that was a good time to actually update the community pretty much the day that the decision was made. So yeah, hats off to the community board there. They had they actually had two meetings, one at 11 o'clock in the morning and one at night. So they had about 100 people in total, and yeah, really engaged, and yeah, they did a really good job. Conscious of time, so just rushing through this list. Really good citizenship ceremony out in the community in Lumsden the other day. It was well attended with a lot of new Kiwis there, and we had the local school do a kapa haka performance as well, which was really cool. Caught up with Joseph Mooney on Friday, following on from our carbon forestry discussion, and had a good chat with him about that, and I'm going to forward on Steve's report so that we can get that awareness up there. And also noting in that Wairara Council's won that court challenge on that rating system that they did. So there's a bit of a precedent that's been set there around forestry as well, so it can add into the mix of what we're looking at. Community Trust South are doing a strategy, looking at their strategy. I know many of you have been involved in that, but I caught up with Jackie and Kirsty around what they're looking at there, and had a good chat with them. Caught up with the the youth council, they were going to have a meeting, but due to low numbers, they didn't actually have a meeting. But one of the councillors and Kate and I jumped in on that, and we had a bit of a brainstorm session around how we can integrate and sort of reimagine the youth council to get them some life back into that and get them involved with our council as well. It was a good first step, and I think it'd be good to get them more engaged with us and us more engaged with them, I guess, too. And Mayor's Task Force for Jobs, we've got a contract for that now, so that's just under 400k for 2 years, funding coming from the government, and working with Great South to do the implementation of that, seeing as they're already kind of doing a lot of work in that space already, so that's going to be quite good for our communities, basically getting young people into work and getting the funding from central government for that, so it's not going to cost us anything. And as long as we deliver the outcomes, we'll get that funding. And I'll just hand over to Matt now, who, through a relationship with the Hokanui Runaka at a recent meeting, came across quite a useful tool for finding out something we've been talking about quite a while as a council, was knowing where council land is in each of our towns. And turns out there's a very useful website that actually highlights all of that, but I'll hand over to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain it. As I guess I've already said it pretty clear today that I like visual aerial views of things. It makes more sense, and I'm a data nerd as well. But one of the conversations at a recent workshop around just kind of future co-designing gravel management around a couple of key bridges that the Ardlussa Community Board's quite concerned about, and then trying to figure out and answer the Community Board's questions around, well, who are the affected parties in terms of that area, and who do you need to engage with to co-design a type of resource consent application or a strategy or something. Also to other questions that I'd heard around the council table around, which even in my short time I've heard a couple of times, of trying to figure out, well, what does council own as far as land, what's reserves, what's municipal endowments, what's refuse reserves. And Megan Reid, who was also present at the workshop, talking about some of the mahi that the Hokanui Runanga are up to, she's got a background with LINZ, and this probably isn't news to many people, it was news to me, the Central Record of State Land GIS map. And as I understand, it's a layer that can also be applied to other GIS maps, so it could even be integrated into the SDC property information maps that we have online. But just as far as a tool for us, a tool for community boards, to answer some of those questions that, oh, well, what land do we have around us, or who owns that land, or who do we need to talk to about using that land? This tool seems to answer quite a few of those questions that in the last 12 months I've certainly come across. So I raised it with Rob, and to, I guess, disseminate the information, wanted to raise it to council, and I guess suggest too that we send that information to community boards, because it could just save some time in terms of asking some of those questions and save some resources in the organisation for having to follow up on some of these things that's quite readily available on the map.
Yeah, I think it'll be really worthwhile to actually let all the community boards know, because quite often, like, you're having a discussion at a board meeting that's not planned, and what land does council actually own in this area, and you could almost do it on the spot there and save having to go to staff, come back and bring it to the next meeting. So I think it'll be really useful to spread that around.
I think one of the examples, in flowing on from that green waste discussion that Ardlussa's been having, thinking about 2 green waste sites and seeing them as council managed sites, and then actually looking at a central record of state land, realising it's a bit more complicated. Some of it's dock land, some of it's private, some of it's council owned, so it's just given a lot more perspective that the board might have had to wait quite a few more meetings or whatever to get that clarity on. Just wanted to highlight it, share the knowledge.
Which is the final item on my list, as you would have seen in the media and heard some discussion around ICC's proposal for a joint local government building in Invercargill. So I wasn't able to attend the meeting on Friday, but Christine attended on my behalf, and I think the outcome of that, do you want to talk to the outcome of that?
It was a very short discussion. It was a half-hour meeting, but everyone's of the same view that we'll take the opportunity, those attending, take the opportunity just to discuss what the options might be without any commitment to undertake any detailed work. So it'll come back to councillors for the further discussion.
Yeah, so we'll get some information.
Once the information's available.
I basically said we're open to the discussion on it, but without some concrete information, we're not going to sort of commit or make any. And there ends the update.
Are we open to questioning at all?
You're trying to get out scot-free,
Rob scot-free. Just with regards to the Over Island discussion, I heard that interview, as you know, on RNZ, and as you'd indicated, as a council, we're prepared to stump up for, around that $1.4 million to build a new wharf. Dock charge concession fees to the operators. Obviously, the operators are feeling pretty aggrieved at the moment, but we can only do what we can do under the law, and we've made some provision there to have a bit of leeway. In the interview, Aaron from Dock had indicated that he was prepared to come back and continue the discussion, and is open to continue that discussion based on the fact that we all want the same thing. You've indicated that you'd managed to have a discussion with the Deputy Director General for the Department of Conservation.
We got off that too.
Was there any real traction around that?
So I'd had a catch up with Aaron on last Thursday. And he caught up with the team yesterday as well, and then Cameron and I caught up with the Deputy Director General. So there's awareness of the whole situation. You would have picked up a lack of commitment in the RNZ interview around actually getting that black and white. We will build and that's kind of where we're sitting at the moment, is trying to get some certainty and some commitment on there. So it's ongoing discussions around getting to that solution. But everything I said on that interview remains true. What we need for the residents and the tourists who are trying to plan their holidays in advance as well, wanting to go to this magic piece of the world, is certainty. And we're running out of time because the existing wharf is not fit for purpose anymore. So there's pressure to get that certainty, and we'll carry on the discussions until
There was no sort of 3 bullet points in particular that could be identified in order to be able to say, right, well, these are the things that we've got to pin down in order to be able to, come to some sort of resolution over this timeline. There's
well, it's
still
essentially
not there yet, or
to me, it's we've attracted the TIF funding, 100K for the track, and the bullet point that we need is Doc to commit to doing the rest, and then
how do we get them over the line? How do we get them over the line?
Carrying on. Yeah, if you've got an answer to that,
I'm going to talk to some people.
Yeah, but it's actively being worked on, and talking to community board members from the island, and Councillor Spraggan will probably agree to this. It's almost a higher priority than CSR at the moment in relation to the needs of the island.
A lot of people affected by it.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I think where we've got to get Doc, I think it's been explained for a long time. But we want Doc to stay down into the bottom track.
In the end, council's going to have to make some decisions, and they will have to be on the basis of a council report. So, I think the mayor's updates are useful to give you a sense that the conversation's progressing with the Department of Conservation. There are other parties involved as well, but ultimately council will have to make a choice about its own part in the project, and that would be by a report. So I'm not sure that we can progress it much further.
Thank you, Your Worship. That report will indicate kind of the timeframes around or the ability to put that in a timely way once we get that agreement. Looking positively at this, that can happen reasonably quickly after that. Just don't give me. It's just and the report will contain that information.
I'm anticipating the report will understand the time pressures as well and what the delivery might be. Just need to remember that in the event that it progresses, a resource consent is required. So even a fast one of those isn't.
Are we able to look at a retrospective consent process at all?
It's
worth a shot.
Good. Emergency works, you thinking?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Cool. So there's no.
I think it's worth noting though also that the cruise industry, other than the one boat causing all the trouble at the moment, by telling their customers the island doesn't want cruise boats going to the island, and we can't find out who said it or what they mean. There has been correspondence from the cruise industry saying that they accept the fact that the wharf is not up to scratch and that it's got limitations on it, and they are happy to use the water taxis. And on the ones that carry rubber duckies on board, which they use down on the sub-Antarctic islands and things, they will simply boat their own passengers ashore.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that we didn't tell the leadership that they weren't welcome.
But that came back from the cruise industry, so.
So is someone in a position to second that report? Thank you, Councillor Graney. All in favour? It's carried. Okay, we are now at the point of moving into excluded for the reasons outlined on something. 149. Is someone in a position to move that they're happy to move into public excluded? Thank you, Councillor Keys. Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. All in favour, please say aye. That's carried. And we'll just have a pause while our live stream is turned off. Thank you.